All small towns have their horror stories, tales of places plagued by terrifying apparitions, unseen forces, and something waiting in the shadows to terrorize unsuspecting innocents. Sometimes it's a bridge at the edge of town, where a man in a bunny suit stalks, wielding an axe and looking for drivers who wander off of the main road. Sometimes it's a cabin in the woods rumored to house an old gnarled witch who steals people away and throws them into a giant soup pot. Maybe it's a cursed hotel where wicked spirits roam the halls and the guests check in but never check out. Or maybe, like the little town where 16-year-old Mark lived, it's a haunted house. Ever since he was a little boy, Mark had been terrified of the house at the end of the lane. He walked past it on his way to school each morning and on his way back in the late afternoon. The sight of it made his palms sweat, his heart beat just a little bit faster. It had once been a grand Victorian manor, with turrets and a wraparound porch painted a brilliant white. But over the years, the paint had faded to a dingy yellow, peeling away from the rotting wood. There were holes in the roof where the rain and snow dripped through between the shingles. The windows were caked with dust and grime, obscuring anything that might be hiding inside. Not that there should have been anything there. The house had been abandoned for decades. Still, whenever he passed it, Mark could swear he felt the presence of something in there, pacing, watching, waiting for him to come inside. The stories around town didn't help. His parents told him to ignore them, said that people just liked to talk when there was nothing else to do, to make up things to be afraid of, because their lives were too boring otherwise. But he couldn't avoid it. On a Boy Scouts trip when he was 12, Mark had tried to cover his ears when the other boys gathered around the campfire with him and turned the topic to the old house, but they teased and taunted him until he listened. They leaned in, faces lit ghoulishly from below by the flickering orange flames, and whispered about the ghost that had taken up residence inside the house. A wealthy old woman had lived there a long, long time ago, they said. She was cruel, with a nasty temper. Everyone in town knew to avoid her, knowing she would throw things at them from her window, shout at them, even sick her guard dogs on them. But one group of boys in town couldn't resist giving her a good scare. They dressed up in all black, red devil masks covering their faces, and broke into her house late one night. When she awoke, they were standing at the foot of her bed, holding pitchforks and telling her that they had come to drag her to hell. Her heart stopped from pure terror at the sight, but her spirit lingered in the house, swearing revenge against anyone who ever dared cross her threshold again, especially teenage boys. Mark didn't sleep a wink the whole camping trip after hearing that. He swore then and there that no matter what, he would never go into that house. But everyone can be bought, and everyone has a price. For Mark, that price was a car. He had been saving up as best he could, but it was tough to get a job with no way to transport himself there, and mowing lawns for his neighbors wasn't the most lucrative gig. So when he learned that his neighbor Oliver, home on a break from college, was getting rid of his old car, he begged to buy it. He doubted Oliver would go for it, knowing what a jerk the guy could be, but to Mark's surprise, Oliver gave him an offer. "I'll tell you what," Oliver's face broke into a sadistic smile. "I'll give you the car if you can spend the whole night in the house at the end of the street, alone." "Are you serious?" Mark scoffed. "Dead serious. Make it to sunrise without freaking out and bailing, and the car's yours. We have a deal?" Oliver stuck out his hand to shake. Every nerve in Mark's body was screaming at him to say no, but if he didn't agree, he wouldn't be able to afford a car until he was in college. With a defeated sigh, he took Oliver's hand. "Deal." But as night fell and Mark prepared to meet Oliver outside of the derelict old house, he could feel pangs of regret deep in his stomach. What was he thinking? Was a car really worth living his worst nightmare? What if Oliver didn't honor the deal? Or worse, what if the stories were actually true? He swallowed the lump in his throat as he shoved a sandwich into his backpack. He had food, water, a blanket, a flashlight, and his phone. Everything he should need to survive the night. It would be fine, he hoped. "Wasn't sure if you'd show," Oliver smirked as Mark walked up to meet him on the rickety front porch. "Well, I did. I'm here." Mark fidgeted nervously, staring up at the house, its windows gazing down at him like large, dark eyes. "So here are the rules. You have to stay here until sunrise. You leave before then, the deal's off. No car for you. And you have to stay alone. No calling for help from your little friends or your mommy and daddy. I'll be back to check on you in the morning and make sure you really did it. Got it? Got it, Mark nodded. Good luck. I'm rooting for you. Really? Oliver turned to leave, then glanced over his shoulder for one final dig. Oh, and watch out for the ghost. I heard if she gets you, there won't even be bones left over. Night! And with that, he walked away. Mark stared down at the doorknob, preparing himself to walk inside. He could still leave. He could turn and run all the way back home, but then Oliver would be right, and he would be a coward. No, he was going to do it. He wasn't some scared little kid anymore. It was just a big, empty house, nothing more. He slowly turned the doorknob, pushed, and with a long, low creak, the door opened to the darkness within. Against his better judgment, Mark instinctively called out, "Hello?" There was, thankfully, no response, just his voice echoing in the vast, empty room. He let out a small sigh of relief and pulled the flashlight out of his backpack, switching it on. He cast its beam around the front room of the house, illuminating water damage, cobwebs that he could only hope were no longer housing any spiders, and a whole lot of plastic-wrapped furniture. As he walked into the living room, he was struck by just how ordinary it all seemed. It was creepy, of course, like any place made for a living that had been deprived of its purpose for far too long, but it wasn't nearly as bad as his imagination had built it up to be. He had been picturing black candles, symbols drawn on the floor in blood, a skeleton perched on the couch, bats hanging from the ceiling. But there was none of that. No ghosts, no signs of danger. This was just mostly sort of sad. Once a home, now just a house, emptied out and left to decay. He could get through the night just fine. As soon as he thought that, he felt something scurry across his foot and let out a scream. The flashlight revealed it to be a large rat running from his sudden intrusion and looking for a place to hide. He clutched his chest, catching his breath. It's just an animal. It's fine. It's not going to hurt you, he reminded himself. Now that some of the mystery was gone, he was starting to wonder what the rest of the house looked like. What had once been breathless fear was replaced with a certain morbid curiosity. If he had to be here all night, he might as well explore. Hey, he thought to himself with a smile. Exposure therapy really works. Scared of a haunted house? Just go roaming around inside the middle of the night. You'll be cured. He sat his backpack down next to the stairs, keeping a grip on his flashlight, and began to investigate the rest of his greatest childhood fear. He walked through the dining room, taking in the ornate chandelier hanging from the ceiling, the long table fit for housing at least a dozen guests. He wandered into the kitchen, the appliances rusty from neglect. The oven and stove where someone once prepared their nightly dinners, all the pieces of life strewn about like an unfinished jigsaw puzzle with no one to pick up the pieces. Suddenly, Mark heard something coming from the other room. It couldn't be, but it sounded like footsteps on the stairs. Someone or something walking down, descending the staircase toward him. He held his breath, heart pounding so hard he couldn't hear it in his ears. The footsteps stopped, and the house was silent once again. Then, slowly, deliberately, he heard the same footsteps heading back up until they faded away, too quiet to hear anymore. That wasn't his imagination. He was not alone in the house. Carefully, he tiptoed back the way he came, careful to not make too much noise walking across the creaking floorboards. When he reached the stairs, he saw no signs of anyone else. In fact, there was nothing there at all. Wait, where was his backpack? He scanned the floor, certain he had just overlooked it, forgetting where he sat it down, but no matter where he looked, it wasn't there. His stomach dropped with a sudden realization. Whoever he had heard coming down the stairs must have taken it. He thought briefly about abandoning it and just running out the front door and never looking back, but his phone was in there. If his parents found out, he'd be grounded for months. Not to mention, he wouldn't have a phone. But what if whoever took it was dangerous? He couldn't be sure, but something in his gut told him he needed to go upstairs and check it out. He considered the weight of the flashlight in his hand. If someone attacked him, would it be enough to defend himself? He sure hoped so. With shaky hands and unsteady legs, he began to climb the stairs to the second floor of the house. Maybe whoever had taken his backpack was just as scared of him as he was of them. It was a comforting thought, though the comfort was short-lived. As he started down the upstairs hall, preparing to search the first bedroom, he heard a door creak open behind him. He turned and froze in wide-eyed terror at the sight. There was a figure there, emerging from the shadows. A pale woman with long, dark hair wearing a white nightgown, reaching out to him with a clawed hand. "Get out!" a voice rasped. Mark shrieked, dropped the flashlight, and tore back down the stairs. He ran to the front door, but as his hand touched the doorknob, a hand grabbed his ankle and pulled. He toppled over, landing on the ground with a painful thud. "Please," he sobbed, shaking from fear. "Don't hurt me. I'll leave. I'm so sorry. Don't kill me." He braced himself for an unearthly voice, for pain, but instead he heard gleeful cackling. He opened his eyes and saw Oliver standing above him. "I knew you couldn't do it. You're such a chicken," he smirked. "What?" Mark stammered. "Come on, did you really think I was going to give you my car? Are you stupid?" Oliver scoffed. Clearly. Mark followed the sound of the new voice coming down the stairs. There was Chase, one of Oliver's equally awful friends. "He still believes in haunted houses. Did you like my work? I made myself." He held up what Mark could now see was a prop, a mannequin dressed up like some kind of ghostly woman. "You gave it a good try, but I think it's time for you to run along home now," Oliver sneered. "Yeah, run home." Ugh. Chase's taunt was cut off as he fell against the banister suddenly. "What the hell? Who pushed me?" He whirled around, but there was no one on the stairs with him. Still, Mark could hear the sound of footsteps hammering past Chase and toward him and Oliver. What happened next shocked him to his core. Oliver was dragged to his feet by the collar of his shirt, pulled by an unseen force. Then, with a loud thwack, something invisible hit him square in the nose. "Ow!" he cried out. But before he could react anymore, he was dealt another blow to the stomach, doubling over in pain. "What the?" Something swept his legs out from under him and he fell hard, head hitting the floor with a crack. Then it was quiet. Oliver was still breathing, but very much unconscious, blood trickling from his nose. "Screw this!" Chase yelled, bolting out the door. As Mark scrambled toward the door to follow him to run home before he could be attacked next, he saw his backpack sliding across the floor toward him. "Thanks for the sandwich," a female voice said, though he couldn't see the source. "I love peanut butter." "You're welcome," he stammered before grabbing his bag and sprinting all the way home. As the story of the haunted house began to spread, rumors and local news reports alike reached the ears of the SCP Foundation. Foundation staff in the area placed infrared cameras around the abandoned house, and the footage captured a human heat signature. Whatever was in that house, it was no ghost. Using infrared cameras to track the entity, it was quickly brought into custody. Before long, the entity was opening up to the Foundation, and she offered to cooperate willingly in exchange for warm food and shelter. So the invisible woman was taken to a nearby Foundation site and given the official classification SCP-347. SCP-347 is a young adult woman, standing at approximately 164 centimeters tall. For all intents and purposes, she is a completely average woman, with one exception: she is completely invisible to the naked eye. This includes her body, as well as everything inside of it, including her blood, skin, and hair samples. Though the cones and rods of the human eye must be visible in order to see, SCP-347's vision has registered as normal following extensive tests. She refers to herself with the name Claudia, though this is assumed to be an alias inspired by Claudia Rains, the lead actor in The Invisible Man. Her real identity, if she indeed has one, has not yet been confirmed. Aside from her invisibility, SCP-347's only other notable traits are an ability to pick locks, a talent for thievery, and the ability to swallow small objects in order to turn them invisible, and then cough them up at a later time without any sickness or discomfort. She seems to crave human contact and socialization, becoming frustrated when she is ignored. She will act out in these cases by pranking people and rearranging and hiding their things. When she is left alone with someone who is sleeping, she has been known to stroke their hair, touch their face, or tuck them in. She does this, she says, because it just feels right. However, those it is done to tend to describe the behavior as unnerving. Though she is invisible in terms of visible light, she can still be seen using infrared or ultraviolet cameras. SCP-347 is currently contained at Site 1, kept in a 5-meter by 5-meter room monitored with an infrared camera. The room has an attached bathroom complete with a shower and bathtub, a queen-size bed, 2 armchairs, a desk and a swivel chair, several bookcases, a TV, and a DVD player. Her bookcases are filled with books, mainly adventure stories, romance novels, and art books, as per her request. She has also been permitted DVD copies of any movies or television shows that she asks for, as long as they predate her arrival at the SCP Foundation. New releases may be added, but only after prior approval from the research team. Though she does not frequently wear clothes, she is to be provided with any clothing that she requests, as well as a collection of makeup and wigs. She has been encouraged to dress up to her heart's content, as it allows Foundation staff to more easily gauge her location at any given time. While she is inside, the door to her room must remain locked. At least 2 staff members must check her door every hour for signs of tampering with the lock. The door may only be unlocked to allow staff in and out for interviews, research, and the delivery of meals and other requested items. She thoroughly enjoys human company and will chat, joke, and even flirt with those who visit her room. She is permitted to leave her containment if and only if she is accompanied by a staff member with at least level 2 security clearance, as well as wearing a layer of grease paint on her face and gloves on her hands. This allows the staff to see her hands and facial expressions. While she is out and about, staff are instructed to treat her with respect and avoid making any rude or crass comments about her invisibility, or her state of dress or undress. If she attempts to escape, she is to be returned to her room and locked inside. If the staff are unable to detect SCP-347's location, they will be given infrared heat vision goggles and instructed to keep an eye out for unusual phenomenon. Dr. Wrights added an addendum to her official file, warning male personnel to politely decline any advances that SCP-347 makes towards them. His note reads, "She's an invisible kleptomaniac. When you leave afterward, you're gonna realize 3 seconds too late that you don't have your keys in your pocket anymore, and you will be held accountable for whatever happens. Besides, the last thing we need is an invisible pregnancy. Dr. Wrights." Yeesh. When she was first contained, SCP-347 had regular violent outbursts and displayed signs of emotional instability, including compulsive theft and depressive episodes during which she would give all surrounding people the silent treatment. Her condition has improved gradually over time, with the application of regular counseling sessions intended to help her heal from the trauma caused by years of complete isolation and being unseen by the world around her. Several of the research staff studying Claudia have suggested that she be introduced to other SCPs, particularly those who are humanoid and considered to be non-threatening. She might, they posit, benefit from social interaction with other anomalous beings that she can relate and connect to. This, in addition to her therapy, could improve her mental and emotional state significantly. After all, just because she's invisible, that doesn't mean she has to feel invisible too. Claudia has expressed a great deal of interest in this idea, stating that it would be nice to have some friends on the inside who aren't being paid to talk to her. Though no matchups have been approved as of yet, several anomalies have been proposed should the program be put into action. SCP-507 was brought up in conversation by more than one researcher, given his harmless nature, friendly demeanor, and fascination with the paranormal. He supported the idea enthusiastically, stating that he would be thrilled to meet a real-life invisible person. SCP-343 has also asked to meet with Claudia, believing he can potentially help her overcome some of her emotional difficulties and offer her some much-needed comfort. Other potential anomalies to introduce to Claudia include SCP-073 and SCP-056, though Claudia's flirtatious nature might complicate the latter. Everybody wants to be known, to be acknowledged, and recognized for the person that they know themselves to be. For SCP-347, it once seemed as if having that simple desire, that human need met, would be impossible for her. But now, for better or for worse, as long as she's in the custody of the SCP Foundation, Claudia can make something approximating a normal life. She can, at last, be seen. There are many shows we remember fondly from our childhoods, from the adventures of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles to the Saturday morning cartoons of the Flintstones or the Jetsons. But arguably the most famous of these cartoons is SpongeBob SquarePants, a show about an optimistic sea sponge and his daily life throughout his city of Bikini Bottom. We all know the same SpongeBob SquarePants in some way or some form. His popularity translated to a lot of merchandise. From plushes to lunchboxes and phone cases, SpongeBob is a staple of childhood and modern-day culture. While the SCP Foundation's world is one where monsters roam and anomalous events affect millions, SpongeBob and his merchandise is also popular within this universe. The SCP Foundation is most well known for its protection of normalcy and from the most extreme and dangerous threats. Anomalies such as SCP-1730, the Interdimensional Site-13, SCP-001 When Day Breaks, or SCP-682, the humanity-hating, hard-to-destroy reptile. These SCPs pose a direct, obvious threat to the people of the SCP universe. A lot of these anomalies have object classes that clearly state the danger level, along with their level of containment difficulty. Keter, Apollyon, Euclid, and more. Safe-class anomalies are not commonly thought of as dangerous, but what about those safe-class anomalies that were specifically made to be inconspicuously dangerous to humankind? Today, we take a deep dive into one such anomaly, and we don't mean scuba diving. Or do we? Anyhow, here's a look at SCP-1808, also known as the Spongebob Watches. Its containment procedures are almost too simple, but given it's a safe-class anomaly, it's all about the difficulty of putting it in a box and keeping it there, more than being about its danger level. There are 6 instances of SCP-1808, and all are kept in standard safe-class anomaly storage lockers in Safe Wing C at Site-25. This is similar to the containment procedures of SCP-662, the Butler's Handbell, which is also a relatively safe anomaly, all things considered. The containment procedures also mention that all testing outside of monitored environments is expressly prohibited. It begs the question, if this safe-class anomaly can be kept in simple storage lockers, why is there such a strict mandate against testing? What potential danger could SCP-1808 pose that these restrictions are placed on it? Well, to properly answer all of your amazingly inquisitive questions, we need to look back on the story of how SCP-1808 came into the Foundation's possession to begin with. In early April of 2004, the Foundation was alerted to an ongoing anomalous item auction from the anomalous group of interest, Marshall, Carter, and Dark. Anomalous groups of interest within the SCP Foundation's universe are all but rare. From the malicious chaos insurgency that works to harm the Foundation by utilizing anomalies as weapons, to SCP-610, which uses Yaldabaoth worshipping Sarkic cults that work to bring humankind back to a primal way of living. These groups are known for their use of the anomalous for executing their plans, and as we've seen time and time again on this channel, by pretty much any means they deem necessary. Let's just say there are not many boundaries set. Or none. Let's go no boundaries. Moving on. When it comes to Marshall, Carter, and Dark, however, they are a bit different from these groups. Instead of calling upon the starfish god like the Fiftists, or rebuilding the god of technology, Mechane, like the Church of the Broken God, Marshall, Carter, and Dark have one motive: profit. This group is solely dedicated to selling and profiting from the anomalous, whether it be through selling to the highest 1% of the 1%, or contracting their anomalies out to other anomalous organizations for high payments. Marshall, Carter, and Dark is in the world of leveraging the anomalous for money, and as much money as possible. The SCP Foundation normally has a somewhat cordial relationship with Marshall, Carter, and Dark, sometimes even purchasing anomalies from the group for containment purposes. However, Marshall, Carter, and Dark often overstep these boundaries, causing the SCP Foundation to have to intervene and steal anomalies from them. The story of SCP-1808 is one of these times the Foundation had to step in. An agent of Mobile Task Force ETA-2, buyer beware, Agent Rosser, was working covertly within the ranks of Marshall, Carter, and Dark, attaining information that may be needed for the SCP Foundation's containment efforts. Agent Rosser was, of course, under strict protocols set forward by the SCP Foundation. He was to keep them updated with any movements Marshall, Carter, and Dark may be making, noting any potential anomalies that may need containing, and as always, making sure to be checking in every day. On April 4th, Agent Rosser failed to do his required check-in, and the Foundation immediately deployed other buyer beware MTF agents to his last known location, a Marshall, Carter, and Dark auction house. The raid commenced, and the SCP Foundation, having some of the most highly trained and sophisticated soldiers and agents in the world, swiftly took the upper hand, restraining and apprehending members of Marshall, Carter, and Dark, and their potential buyers. A large-scale search then commenced for Agent Rosser within the auction house, where he was found seated behind a curtain with all 6 instances of SCP-1808 attached to his body, one on each of his wrists and ankles. and 2 fastened together around his neck. Agent Rosser was found in a state that could only be described as pure torment. He was unrecognizable. The bones of his fingers and toes were so elongated they circled back onto themselves. The skin of his hands and feet were torn to shreds from the force of whatever was pulling at them. The Foundation-issued boots Agent Rosser wore were ripped as well to make way for the bones. And possibly most ghastly of all, his teeth had grown out of his mouth, tearing the skin of his cheeks and jaw. Could it be that these simple Spongebob watches were the cause of his torture? There were no other obvious threats observed that could possibly be the cause of these changes to his body. This made the Foundation suspicious and worried. What else could be in store for them? The SCP-1808 file described the anomaly as a set of 6 yellow plastic wristwatches. These watches are patterned, with green dots scattered along the watch body, along with images of the famous cartoon character SpongeBob SquarePants. The first anomalous property of SCP-1808 is that no matter what mechanical or electronic parts are removed, the watch still operates as if it's perfectly intact. The most dangerous part of SCP-1808 is when it's placed on a person or animal. As long as the wearer has limbs and phalanx bones, SCP-1808's main anomalous property will affect them. Once put on, SCP-1808 cannot be removed unless the person who put it on decides to take it off. Once placed, those wearing SCP-1808 will hear a chime of SpongeBob's famous or infamous chuckle every 15 minutes. If hearing that wasn't suffering enough, SCP-1808's anomalous property will now begin to affect the wearer. After the laugh is heard, the bones in whatever hand the person is wearing SCP-1808 will begin to grow in length. Every 15 minutes, as long as SCP-1808 is worn, these bones will extend about 6 centimeters until the watch is removed. The skin around the bones does not grow, so once they get long enough, the bones will tear through and rip the skin to continue growing. While there is no blood loss once this happens, those who have worn SCP-1808 describe the growing as immensely painful. These changes do not have to be permanent. Should the person that placed it on the poor soul who has to suffer these consequences feel a bit of mercy, they can retract the adjustment knob of the watch and rotate it counterclockwise. Upon doing this, the bones will begin to shrink back to their original size, and the ripped and torn skin will anomalously heal back to its normal state, as if SCP-1808 never affected it. While the physical harm that SCP-1808 inflicts on its victims can be reversed, the memory of the pain and torment the victims went through will be fully remembered, potentially causing further psychological torment even when the watches are removed. The item's description also includes the terrifying note that 2 instances of SCP-1808 can be placed around a subject's neck, and instead of lengthening any bones in the neck, it will instead mercilessly cause the victim's teeth to grow. In the case of Agent Rosser, we now know the suffering he was going through during his time as a spy for the SCP Foundation. Yikes. The potential danger these watches can pose if in the wrong hands, no pun intended of course, can be devastating. What if an authoritarian government purchased these anomalies? The torture SCP-1808 inflicts upon its victims could easily be used to squeeze information out of a person of interest. Same goes for the Chaos Insurgency, who could use these anomalies to attack the SCP Foundation and gain classified information only someone like a member of the Overseer Command would know. These anomalies had to be contained. The Foundation quickly restrained the Marshall Carter and Dark Agent inflicting this horrible torture on Agent Rosser, and forced him to return Agent Rosser's deformities back to normal and hand over the watches. Questions circled in the Foundation's minds. Why was there no blood despite the amount of damage on Agent Rosser's skin? And why did the Marshall Carter and Dark Agents do this to him in the first place? A Foundation doctor conducted an interview with Agent Rosser, with hopes to figure it all out. The doctor began with a simple statement. "Kindly summarize the events leading up to your abduction." Rosser answered, "There was nothing crazy about my abduction. I went to sleep in my flat and woke up tied to a table. Maybe I was drugged, but I'm not sure." This confused the doctor. Normally when an undercover SCP Foundation agent is discovered, they are not treated with the relative kindness Agent Rosser was shown. These groups, especially those such as Marshall Carter and Dark, normally want information, and will take that by any means necessary. The doctor continues with his questioning.
How did Marshal Carter and Dark come to discover your identity as a Foundation field agent? Rosser chuckles. I was never compromised as an agent. You see, I don't think they were even aware I was Foundation. If they were, they would have called off the auction and gotten their goods the hell out of there. He goes on to say that he didn't even tell his friends or family any details that would have made them suspicious of his rank in the Foundation. Once again, the doctor was extremely confused by this move on Marshal Carter and Dark's part. If they didn't know Agent Rosser was of the SCP Foundation, why did they torture him? The doctor asks this question to Agent Rosser. If your identity wasn't compromised, why were you abducted and tortured? Agent Rosser responds, I think it was quality assurance, testing the product, making sure it worked, experimenting with it, and if the raid hadn't happened, they would have put me on stage and demonstrated it. Like the SCP Foundation, Marshal Carter and Dark are more than willing to test out these anomalies on unwilling subjects. Perhaps they see their employees like the SCP Foundation sees the D-Class personnel. At least the D-Class personnel are death row inmates. They're people who committed heinous crimes, whereas Agent Rosser and his co-workers were innocent people trying to make a living. We see how brutal the world of a profit-driven anomalous group could be with what happened to Agent Rosser, and one could only imagine the horrifying torment the former employees of Marshal Carter and Dark may have went through under this so-called quality assurance. Agent Rosser continued with his story. He described the events leading up to the watches being placed on him. He drowsily awoke in the dark room strapped to a table. He recognized the room he was in as the basement. He looked to his left and then his right when his stomach dropped. He wasn't the only one down there. Next to him were people he recognized as his co-workers, strapped to tables like him. After this realization, his shock turned to fear as senior members of Marshal Carter and Dark entered the room. We are downsizing, one of them said to the helpless employees. They were going to use them as guinea pigs for their twisted testing of their products. Agent Rosser gets distracted, describing how much he used to enjoy the SpongeBob SquarePants television show. He watched it recently and found it funny, but now all he could think of is that laugh. Every 15 minutes, that laugh signified more torture, more torment that he had to be put through. Now he can't imagine watching the show without thinking of the torment SCP-1808 and Marshal Carter and Dark put him through. While the physical scars are gone, the mental ones still awfully remain. The doctor interviewing him requests that Agent Rosser stays on the topic of SCP-1808. The agent apologizes and continues. First they just strapped the watches to my wrists and ankles and waited. After they were sure the things went off every 15 minutes, they started twisting the little knobs. He describes that he knew he was definitely being tested on. The Marshal Carter and Dark senior staff were observing these tests the entire time and even participated. The experimenters would twist the knobs mercilessly until the bones in his hands and feet tore free of the skin and hit the walls of the basement, only for them to crank them back and forth and begin the process all over again. You can only imagine how many times they did this to the agent, for no other purpose but quality assurance. Agents of the SCP Foundation are trained to withstand awful torture so that no confidential or important information is revealed to other groups of interest or the public. Agent Rosser, being trained by the Foundation, would know this training. He attempted to use his training methods to resist the torture, but sadly it wasn't enough. Agent Rosser states, "The pain was from the inside. The tips of my fingers were worn off and peeled back like an old pair of gloves. He was one of the lucky ones. Though the people chained to the tables in the same room he was in didn't survive whatever twisted torture they went through at the hands of Marshal Carter and Dark." The doctor realizes that part of Agent Rosser's story is being overlooked and states, "When you were discovered, two of the watches had been joined together and fastened around your neck." Agent Rosser is silent. This was clearly the most horrifying part of the entire ordeal for him. His silence persists for another minute, and the doctor calls his name. "Agent Rosser?" Rosser shakily begins. Apparently, the Marshal Carter and Dark senior staff weren't impressed with the effects of SCP-1808, despite the clear signs of pain and anguish from Agent Rosser. They thought it needed to be improved for a higher sale price. One of them suggested placing two of the watches around his throat. Rosser describes how his teeth began to grow. My teeth started getting longer, like my fingers and toes, but they didn't go straight. They went off in different directions. Some went inside. Rosser explains that all he could hear every time his teeth grew was that infamous Spongebob laugh. He goes on to tell the doctor that this torture impressed the senior staff of Marshall, Carter, and Dark enough to continue with the sale. The memory of this makes Agent Rosser ill, and he vomits before he can even finish the thought. The doctor allows Agent Rosser to be dismissed. Hopefully, he was provided with some Class A amnestics to forget this whole ordeal. The Foundation didn't contain SCP-3000 and harvest the Y-909 compound for nothing. The SCP-1808 file also includes a recovered auction catalog that Marshall, Carter, and Dark would have used to describe SCP-1808 to potential buyers. The description goes on to read, "These watches are the only products in existence with such uncanny abilities, and businesses or individuals wishing to carry out quick, efficient, and mess-free interrogations would be remiss in missing this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to acquire them, as would our patrons with tastes for intimate sessions of impassioned discomfort." The starting bid on SCP-1808, only £14,600. Marshall, Carter, and Dark had no issues selling these watches to those who wanted to inflict awful torture on their unwilling and unknowing victims. And we thought the SCP Foundation was willing to stomp moral boundaries. All it took was a little motivation for profits, and Marshall, Carter, and Dark were shamelessly off to the races. For a few rather normal-looking SpongeBob-themed watches, SCP-1808 is truly a terrifying anomaly. Thanks to Agent Rosser's sacrifice, they are no longer on wrists and necks and are now in, shall we say, better hands with the Foundation. In the case of Marshall, Carter, and Dark, they suspended their morality to the point of testing the anomaly on their own employees. I guess this goes to show that profits over people is more than just a scary concept, even in the world of the SCP Foundation.
What would you trade in order to make your deepest desires a reality? How much would you be willing to barter in order to have what you want? Whether it's money, love, fame, or power that you crave, would you bargain your soul to have it? How about your memories? What about the life of another person? If these questions intrigue you, then boy, do we have the deal of a lifetime for you. Well, not us, but rather a certain anomaly who's very, very interested in the art of the deal. We've all heard the old adage of a deal with the devil, meaning a pact with someone potentially shady in order to get what you want. Not only are you compromising your own principles when you make a deal like this, you're also running the risk of that deal coming back to haunt you when it's time to pay the devil his dues. And believe us, the devil always comes to collect. Of course, you've never made a deal with the actual devil, and if you had, it's likely you wouldn't live long enough to warn people not to make the same mistake. But we've all heard the legends, Beelzebub appearing to those in dire need of help and offering them salvation. Shaking that outstretched clawed hand normally results in the desperate person getting what they need, but also agreeing to give Satan something along the lines of their soul or firstborn child, or sometimes something even worse. The point being that dealing with the devil often extracts a heavy price, and one you might not be so willing to pay if you could see the terms more clearly. Which brings us to SCP-738, also known as the Devil's Deal. Although this SCP has no relation to the actual biblical Lord of Darkness himself, as far as we know anyway, that nickname should paint a very clear picture for you of how this entity operates. Kept in 3 linked containment chambers, SCP-738 is guarded at all times by armed Foundation personnel when not in use. Strangely for an anomaly with such a terrifying reputation, it appears as an elegant 3-piece set of furniture, the kind you might find in a fancy office belonging to a slick CEO. The set consists of a desk, 1 straight-back chair, and another more extravagant office chair, styled to look like a throne, all featuring brass detailing and exquisite velvet padding in a deep royal purple. When kept apart, these objects seem to be little more than just expensive pieces of office furniture, examples of quality craftsmanship that would likely cost you an arm and a leg to afford, but nothing overtly sinister or anomalous. Until, that is, the 3 pieces are put together and you take a seat. If someone sits down opposite the throne, within the desk between them, then they had best be ready to bargain, because once you sit down, you will find yourself faced with an anomalous entity across from you on the throne. While many of the D classes the Foundation has placed before this entity have described it as being charming or even seductive, descriptions of the entity's appearance varies wildly between subjects. In fact, it would seem that the entity deliberately appears differently to everyone that sees it, their very own personalized devil with which to strike a deal. After all, this business is personal. Additionally, the entity cannot be observed by anyone except for those sitting in the anomalous chair of SCP-738. For anyone not sitting in the special chair, the most they'll see of the entity is the throne shifting as it leans backwards or sits up. It isn't interested in being seen by anyone who isn't part of the transaction. This entity is clearly quite the negotiator and doesn't waste any time in getting to the meat of the conversation. During tests by the Foundation, recordings have been made of the entity's voice, making all manner of enticing offers and promises to whomever is sitting before it. The entity will produce parchment from the desk, writing up what looks to be a contract with a quill and ink pot. If whomever is sitting in the opposite chair makes a formal request to the entity, it will cease its previous barrage of offers and take a brief pause before suggesting a price. During their first attempt to gauge the nature and effects of SCP-738, the Foundation sent one of its researchers into a room containing the desk, throne, and chair. According to his report, he saw a man sitting behind the desk, wearing a sharp red and gold colored business suit. The entity immediately bombarded the man with potential deals they could strike, offering him greater recognition and respect for his research, the love of the woman the man wanted, and even offering him the chance to join the O5 Council. Refusing to be coerced into any of these deals, the researcher left the room and seemed to suffer no adverse effects for his refusal. Since this initial incident, when testing the behavior and effects of SCP-738, the Foundation primarily uses D-Class personnel. As we all know by now, these personnel are considered disposable, having been recruited from prisons around the world, and ones testing SCP-738 are fitted with an explosive collar, just in case. In one instance, one of these Class D personnel placed before the SCP-738 entity reported that this time, it had taken on the appearance of a beautiful, seductive woman. During the initial proposals made by the SCP-738 entity, the inmate was offered his freedom. The price of freedom is often high, but the Class D may not have been expecting the price to be the death of his best friend. But the inmate agreed to the terms of the deal he'd been offered and vanished shortly after. 5 hours later, though, he was recaptured by Foundation personnel. When another member of Class D personnel, a non-native English speaker, sat down to bargain with SCP-738, the entity communicated with him in his first language. Their deal, while similar to the previous test, used more specific wording. The Class D inmate asked for the power to never be held in a cell again, rather than just for freedom. The price asked for by the SCP-738 entity this time was every memory of the man's mother. After he accepted, an incident broke out which resulted in the inmate's death, as well as that of 12 Foundation guards. The next test the Foundation conducted into the effects of SCP-738 involved yet another Class D, this time utilizing an inmate with dyslexia and a mental disability, who reported that the entity appeared to take the form of a large pink rabbit. Once again adapting to the subject before it, the entity drew crude pictograms on its parchment, trying to convey a deal to the latest Class D to sit across the desk from it. There were a few words scattered about the page in English, but mostly unrelated insults aimed at the inmate's intelligence, or questioning the man's understanding of the deal the entity was proposing. The entity offered the man a sloppy Joe, stating the price to be Mopsy, the name given to a toy that the inmate had smuggled into the Foundation and been allowed to keep. Upon accepting the deal, a fine china plate appeared in front of the man, with the promised sandwich upon it. The man quickly finished the food that the entity had provided, only to become distressed when he realized that Mopsy had vanished. Shortly after the test had concluded, Foundation staff issued the Class D with another toy identical to the one that had been bargained away from him. However, as soon as he named the new toy Mopsy, it too disappeared, once again causing the inmate a great deal of emotional distress. Further testing found that there was little that could damage the furniture of SCP-738. Foundation researchers even tried exposing it to explosives to no effect. Despite appearing to be crafted from mahogany, neither the desk nor the chairs were able to catch fire and burn. Gunshots did not tear through the woodwork as one would expect, and even a mechanical wood chipper did nothing to cause even the slightest of damage. There was, however, one thing that did. When directly attacking the desk with an axe, a single gash was left scored into the mahogany surface by the bladed head. This did, unfortunately, lead to the death of the personnel wielding said axe, and afterwards the mark left in the desk began gradually healing. Changing their approach, the Foundation ceased sending Class D personnel to make deals with whatever devil appeared sitting at the desk. Instead, a researcher took the seat opposite, and before the entity began its usual stream of offers to fulfill deep desires, the researcher asked a simple question: "What are you?" The SCP-738 entity took the form of a huge snake and answered, "I'm sorry. It's against policy to divulge personal details, but may I interest you in..." It is unknown what the entity offered the researcher, but the session was called to be halted shortly after, and the Foundation researcher was institutionalized pending psychiatric review. The final test of SCP-738 involved a Mr. Sheldon Katz, senior counsel of the Foundation's legal department, who presented the entity with a fully legally watertight document, stating he was not acting on behalf of the SCP Foundation and was testing SCP-738 of his own free agency. Mr. Katz reported that, in this instance, the SCP-738 entity assumed the form of a professor who had taught Sheldon during his first year of law school, but didn't include any information as to what sort of deal the entity had offered him. After 41 hours of debate, during which a 900-page-long agreement between him and SCP-738 was drafted, Mr. Katz eventually passed out from sheer, overwhelming exhaustion. A red leather envelope was found on him when he was removed from the testing room, containing a handwritten note and smelling heavily of sulfur. The note simply read, "Please come back anytime. I haven't had so much fun in years." The incidents involving SCP-738 all follow a strikingly similar pattern. After adjusting to the person before it, both appearing in a form specific to them and communicating with them in such a way that they will best understand, the SCP-738 entity will attempt to entice their latest emptor with their deepest desires. When the person opposite them makes a request, the entity brings up the question of price. While they can be negotiated with, it will insist that the price be of equal value to what is being requested, like for like, perhaps even a soul for a soul. It is worth noting that the entity that sits in that throne will not always follow through on deals if they determine the person making the request does not want the object enough, or if they request an object for someone else as a way of trying to dodge paying the full price. It seems that this entity, being the bargainer that it is, does not indulge requests that are made to affect other people, or for items that can easily be passed on to others. Accepting a deal with whatever devil appears across that desk from you will make your wish come true. Isn't that how deals with the devil always go? After all, you are certain to get whatever you ask for, anything your heart desires, if you're willing to pay the right price for it. Just make sure that you always read the fine print of that agreement before you sign, because the price won't always be something you're willing to pay. There's a quote that says, "The beautiful thing about learning is nobody can take it away from you. But what good is learning if the knowledge might hurt you, drive you mad, or even kill you? It just sits there in your mind, like a stick of dynamite with an invisible fuse. It could blow at any moment. All it takes is a careless slip of the tongue, and you might turn into a talking home appliance." This is a conundrum faced by anyone dealing with an Infohazard, a certain kind of anomaly often dealt with by the SCP Foundation. Before we get into some of the craziest examples of Infohazards and what they've done to people, because let's face it, that's what you're really here for, first we have to answer that big question everyone's a little afraid to ask. Just what is an Infohazard, and how does it differ from a far more common type of SCP, the dreaded Cognitohazard? Well, we're glad you're finally brave enough to ask. First, Cognitohazards are anomalies that are dangerous to perceive through one of the senses. A well-known example is SCP-096, which is actually a visual cognitohazard. You see its face and you're toast. It's as simple as that. And cognitohazards exist for all of the other senses too. hearing, taste, touch, even smell. Infohazards, on the other hand, are different. These anomalous effects are triggered when you start trying to express or describe something about what you've perceived. And when you do, things start to get really weird, really fast. Maybe you're trying to explain what you just saw to family members, friends, or the police. Maybe you're a member of SCP Foundation staff trying to write up a report or a new experiment log. Or maybe you're a YouTube channel trying to create entertaining yet informative breakdowns and explanations of anomalies from the SCP Foundation. If any or all of these apply to you, then Infohazards are going to be your worst enemy. But as we look at some of the strangest examples, we'll try our best to resist their effects. First, seeing as it's so hot out, how about we take a relaxing dip in the pool while we tell you all about SCP-1128. What is SCP-1128? Well, that's a loaded question. Technically speaking, it's a massive predatory aquatic creature, but despite its huge size, the creature can hunt its prey in any body of water. Whether you're stepping in a puddle, relaxing in the bath, or say chilling out in the pool, SCP-1128 can track you down and potentially eat you alive. In one particularly horrifying test, a D-Class was drinking from a simple glass of water when the aquatic predator emerged, yanked them inside, and ate them. Okay, so maybe you're feeling a little nervous now, but don't worry, you're still safe. Some people have even survived their attacks from SCP-1128. Well, their initial attacks anyway. The creature has a tendency to come back again and again, relentless in its ravenous hunger for human flesh. Whenever it attacks successfully, all that's left is some blood floating on the water. But again, please don't worry too much about this creature. We don't have another 682 on our hands. After all, it's an Infohazard. It can only start hunting you if you receive a written or verbal description of the creature. Oh, or some kind of visual representation of the creature too. Actually, on second thought, you might want to get out of the pool now. And put down that drink too. Instead, let us tell you a nice little story. You step into a bar, smelling of fine liquor and rich mahogany. You even get a whiff of some fine leather-bound book. You see us sitting at the bar, motioning for you to come over, and you decide to approach. You're intrigued by our winning smile and our vast knowledge of anomalies and SCP Foundation lore. You take a seat next to us and order a drink. Get something fancy. It's on our tab after all. Our treat. What does this have to do with Infohazards, you ask? That's the thing about SCP-1893, kid. We say, our dulcet tones smoother than scotch. You can never just talk about it. It's an Infohazard that forces information about it to be delivered like a story. That's why we're in this bar right now. That's the setup. It expresses actual information about itself through the dialogue, see? You nod, beginning to grasp the concept as the bartender serves you your drink. It's been forever since you've been to a bar. Feels good to be out again, honestly. You drink deeply, savoring the flavor, but you almost choke when you see the man standing in the corner. He's so large and so distinctive. It surprises you that you hadn't noticed him before now. He stands in the corner, a freakishly tall and muscular guy, like a basketball player who decided to become a pro bodybuilder. His muscular arms are bulging out of his white vest, and a pair of bull's horns are tattooed across the top of his bald head, making him look like the devil made flesh. He stares at you with a subdued kind of annoyance, as if to say that you're not in real danger quite yet. But if he wanted, he could grab you and twist your head off like a bottle cap. What's with the huge guy, you ask us, more than a little concern in your voice? Oh, him? We reply with a smirk. He comes with the anomaly. He appears in every SCP-1893 experience to an extent, though his level of involvement varies. If SCP-1893 doesn't perceive you as an annoyance or a threat, then you're good to go. But if 1893 starts to feel like you're gonna cause it some problems, then the guy with the horn tattoos is gonna intervene. Speaking of which, you look up and you see that the giant man is now standing next to you, brow furrowed in visible rage. He picks up your drink and crushes the glass in his hand without flinching, dripping booze and blood onto the counter. He snarls, "I think you've had enough, buddy. Now it's time for you to leave, or we're gonna have to get physical. Capiche?" You don't need to be told twice. You grab your hat, get up and leave the bar, abandoning us on our lonely stool. But our next Infohazard still awaits.
You like poetry? Japanese poetry, yes? The humble haiku. It's Dear 931, a unique Infohazard. It's so poetic.
Though specifically it takes the form of haiku. So what does that mean? A rigid structure. The first line 5 syllables, then 7, then 5. We can't talk about this in ways other than haiku. It is challenging. Object class is safe. It is kept at Site 19. Need 3rd tier clearance. So what is this thing? SCP-931. It is a rice bowl, white with a blue band and a cracked blue pattern, all inside the bowl. And we must confess, we took that one from the file. Man, haikus are hard. 3 inches in height, 4.5 inches across. Metric doesn't fit. No maker's marks found. Suspected to have been made late 1900s. Really makes you think on the skill of these poets. Sans anomalies. Sure, it can't kill you, but writing these drives you mad. Curse 931. Trapped in this rhythm scheme makes the old man's torture world look like a resort. Okay, let's move on. Other SCPs to see. We're sick of haiku. Okay, back to normal. Time to shake off the structures of SCP-931 and talk about another iconic Infohazard, SCP-3007. This incurable Infohazard is a lot less whimsical than a rice bowl that forces you to write and speak in haiku. In fact, it's literally killed 7 people, and some in surprisingly gruesome ways. The main component of the Infohazard is known as SCP-3007-1. This is an extremely vivid anomalous hallucination that affects those under the 3007 umbrella, known as SCP-3007-2. To be afflicted with SCP-3007 is a truly horrifying and debilitating condition. The hallucinations occur at an average of 4 times a day, with each episode lasting for as long as an hour. And during these episodes, the victims are at risk of grievous bodily harm, or even death. So the question now is, what exactly is the SCP-3007-1 hallucination? To the people experiencing it, they appear to be transported to a strange alien world consisting of a huge number of white towers or pillars stretching into the sky. SCP-3007-2 specimens are trapped on a series of bridges, incredibly far off the ground, that connect these various structures. This anomalous area is known as SCP-3007-3. It is important to remember that people transported to this world still remain, physically, in our own. However, any damage sustained with SCP-3007-3 will carry over into our own reality. To give one particularly gruesome example, some people fall from the precarious bridges and tumble to their deaths in SCP-3007-3. Back in our reality, they suddenly explode from the damage of an invisible high-speed impact, killing them instantly. There's much more to SCP-3007, enough that it probably warrants its own explanation, and the SCP Foundation takes it extremely seriously, believing that if the Infohazard is allowed to breach containment and become contagious, it could result in an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario. As a result, anyone found to be infected by SCP-3007 is contained and summarily terminated to reduce the risk of its spreading. To make things even worse, there are also concerns about SCP-3007-3 seeping into our reality, as those standing within a 2-meter range of SCP-3007-2 during a 3007-1 episode can actually hear the sounds from the terrifying hallucinatory reality. Okay, that was a little scary. How about instead of falling to your death without falling at all, we talk about a nice movie. Gonershrav by Martin Scorsese, one of the best gangster movies of all time. Wait, you've never heard of Gonershrav? It's got everything. Action, suspense, romance, a mountain of black thorns on which lives a dark tyrant of terrible and unknowable power. You sure you've never seen Gonershrav? Well, here's the thing. All signs point to movies like Gonershrav's and many others simply not existing. This comes as a result of SCP-2747, an Infohazardous phenomenon that causes people to talk about works of fiction that don't exist. These works often feature commonalities, like an ethereal or disturbing tone, ambiguity, black thorns, and a sinister, mysterious antagonist. The Foundation is doing all they can to hunt down and suppress SCP-2747, but it's proving more difficult than they'd imagined. Currently, the leading hypothesis is that these tales may have actually existed once, but were erased from reality, leaving only the residue of memory and the odd scrap of evidence around. Many researchers speculate that the various pieces that form SCP-2747 are anafabula, pieces of fiction accidentally composed with the perfect elements to cause them to quite literally erase themselves over time. Now, the greatest concern that the Foundation has about these anafabulas is that they might actually be one, and their reality is on the precipice of collapse. But we really don't have time to unpack that right now, and like SCP-3007, a full explanation of this anomaly would take some time and is probably best tackled on its own. But there you have it, folks, Infohazards. They all say that knowing is half the battle, but in this case, it is the whole battle, and if you know, you lose. Not really a battle at all, come to think of it. More of a trap. But whether it's a vicious megafish, a strangely buff man with bull tattoos, a poetic rice bowl, or a nightmarish ordeal of daily hallucinations, there is no doubt that Infohazards are some of the most strange and fascinating anomalies that the Foundation has to offer.
Oh, and of course, how could we forget the most well-known infohazard of all, SCP-2521. This entity is so infohazardous that its Foundation file entry is written in pictograms. This is because whenever information is recorded about this entity, it manifests and steals it. If you write it down, it'll take the paper. If you make a note of it on a computer, it'll take the computer. And of course, if you talk about it, it'll... Oh no, 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 again, no, 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 no! Ah! Oh, that was a close one. But I'm okay. For now, at least. But don't worry about me. It has been said that 1 is the loneliest number that you will ever know. But at least the number 1 is a number that can actually be known. What could we possibly mean by that? We'll try to imagine a number that cannot possibly be known or quantified. A missing number, if you will. No, not that one. This is a number that you can never put into an equation or a formula, and it does not appear in the numerical sequence. You cannot count to it, add to, divide, or multiply by it, or even see it. And yet this number still somehow exists. Sounds impossible, doesn't it? After all, the mathematicians among you will understand that the numbers are not a force of nature. They aren't a metaphysical aspect of our reality like space or time. Numbers are a tool, in a way. A tool created by human beings. We use them to measure and calculate. Numbers help us make some sense of this crazy world that we all live in. Just ask your math teacher, and they'll tell you how important numbers are to human civilization. The point is, ancient mathematicians invented numbers, so how could a number ever be missing? What makes a number unknowable? Well, perhaps it's time you learned. Math class is in session, and today we're talking about SCP-033, also known by the appropriate nickname of the missing number. As you may have already gathered, the whole point of SCP-033 is that it can't fully be understood by the ordinary human mind. Even highly trained mathematicians, experts in the use of numbers, able to understand the most complex equations, are barely able to interpret the formula that results in this missing number. At present, it exists written down on an irregularly shaped piece of paper. This paper does not have any right angles, no parallel borders, and the length of each side is different from all others. The SCP Foundation keeps this paper stored securely, locked up at the minimum safe distance of 30 meters away from any computer or other electronic device. On the paper itself is the mathematical formula that equals SCP-033. As you can probably imagine, the formula is intensely complex. It is filled with mathematical symbols ranging from common ones that you would immediately recognize, to those that are way more sophisticated and would likely require a PhD to fully understand. And then there are parts of this unfathomable problem that would baffle even the world's most notable math geniuses. But all these symbols and numbers coalesce to equal a number that has somehow been missed by all of humanity throughout the entire history of our civilization. One noted mathematician by the name of Professor Hutchinson, who first observed the calculation of SCP-033, referred to the missing number as theta prime.
Okay, so here we have a number that can barely be understood by the average person, created by a formula so complex that when written down it might as well be a page full of gibberish. Surely there couldn't be anything more to it than that, right? Wrong. You should know by now that the SCP Foundation doesn't concern themselves with the mundane, ordinary type of strange. They deal exclusively in the kind of strange that has anomalous origins and properties. In the case of SCP-033, the missing number is so complex that it practically breaks every and all rules of mathematics. In other words, Theta Prime cannot possibly remain fixed within our reality. The reason why the paper Theta Prime is written on has to have such unusual dimensions is due to the anomalous effect of the number. When written on ordinary paper, canvas, or any other similar surface or material, the missing number will begin to break down whatever it has been written on. It will literally erode and disintegrate anything on a molecular level. You might be forgiven for thinking you could get around that by typing out the equation for Theta Prime on a computer, but you would be wrong. This reaction even affects technology, burning out any and all devices someone attempts to digitally store SCP-033 on. And if written on literally anything else, well then the missing number will fade, become obscured and unintelligible in a matter of seconds, unreadable to anyone. We've talked a lot about what SCP-033 does, mainly because we can't really show or tell you what it looks like. Well, unless you want your computer, phone, or tablet to break down and melt from the inside out. Like we mentioned earlier, Theta Prime cannot remain fixed in our reality, and it will fade away from any surface or destroy any devices used to display or calculate it. But the anomalous effects of the missing number do not stop there. SCP-033 also possesses the ability to leap from any safe material, like the paper of specific dimensions that it is written and stored on. That is why the safe containing the paper with the missing number equations written on it has to be kept a certain distance away from any electronic devices or other surfaces that can display Theta Prime. Should a material safely storing SCP-033 come into contact with anything unsafe, say a computer, then the missing number will pass on to the unsafe device, material, or surface and begin to destabilize its atomic structure. Any paper or electronic storage device within a 30-meter safe distance of SCP-033 risks becoming a victim of Theta Prime, almost as if the number itself is an infectious virus. Although the SCP Foundation's top researchers have tried their best to find one, there currently exists no safe way to store SCP-033 digitally. The Foundation has a number of projects that are still ongoing, looking into the best possible method to store the missing number electronically, without posing a risk to their computer systems. Additionally, the Foundation has long been conducting research of a different nature, trying to find some way of weaponizing SCP-033. It doesn't seem like a bad idea, right? After all, Theta Prime functions a lot like a computer virus when it comes into contact with machines. So why wouldn't they try to use it as a weapon? It is the goal of these projects that the Foundation will be able to use the missing number as a way to neutralize hostile machine SCPs. Any anomalies that they encounter that operate on logic-based systems, such as artificial intelligences, could in theory be susceptible to the destructive effects of SCP-033. Within the SCP archive file for the missing number is a classified article that details more about the discovery of SCP-033. Before going on to explore the results of the Foundation's testing with Theta Prime's use as a cyber weapon of sorts. First and foremost is a transcript from a debriefing with Professor Hutchison. If you were paying attention earlier, then you will remember that this is the same Professor Hutchinson that first observed SCP-033. And as a noted mathematician, he has some invaluable inside knowledge on the nature of Theta Prime, as he calls it.
Every school child knows that 2 plus 2 is 4. The solid mathematical certainty of numerical order and value is the basis for all logic-based systems. We know that after 2 comes 3 and after 3 comes 4. What this formula proves is that we missed a number somewhere. Imagine if all our technology was based on the belief that after 4 came 6. We simply didn't know or conceive of 5. That is, in essence, what this formula proves. We missed a number.
The professor then goes on to ponder why handcrafted vellum works the best for containing SCP-033. Vellum is essentially an older type of fine parchment that originally would have been made from the skin of a calf or other young animal. Professor Hutchinson seems to theorize that there are two ways this particular material is able to keep SCP-033 written on it.
One, the irregularity of the crafting process due to human error serves to eliminate any traces of regularity that would be found in a machine-created product. Two, the irregular borders seem to confuse it somehow, as if it gets locked up looking for a pattern to identify and use as an escape hatch. I'll tell you this though, I don't think it should be left on anything longer than a few days. It will find a pattern eventually.
Finally, Professor Hutchinson then goes on to talk about the anomalous effects of the missing number, specifically its ability to destroy materials or computers that it comes into contact with. Hutchinson posits a theory that Theta Prime does not actually destroy anything, but instead tries to integrate itself into a system or onto a page. But the system or page cannot cope with the missing number, and so breaks down. It is almost as if he thinks the number itself wants to be understood. It longs for humanity to understand it after having been missed for so very, very long. But Theta Prime is so utterly beyond our understanding that it has the potential to be devastating.
It's like trying to cram another book into a completely full bookshelf. If you get a hammer, you can get it in there, but the whole shelf bursts eventually. If it gets out into the internet, we will potentially experience a full IT infrastructure collapse within hours.
During one of their numerous tests with SCP-033, the Foundation's researchers wrote the various equations and formulae that equal Theta Prime on a standard piece of white copy paper, referred to as X1. Then they placed a second sheet, X2, just 30 centimeters away from X1. Within about a minute, the same mathematical symbols and formulae on X1 had started to appear on X2. After 160 seconds, the second page was full with the complex equation for the missing number. After around 5 minutes, both X1 and X2 began to appear slightly damp. However, Theta Prime and its related equations were still visible on the pages. After double that time, the first page X1 had begun to separate, dissolving partly into water and the rest into the pulp that had formed the paper itself. While it still kept the same standard shape and size, the formulae written on it had since become unreadable. X2 was still wet as well, but SCP-033 was still visible. After over 21 minutes had passed, X1 had been completely destroyed. The water component of it had evaporated, and the paper pulp had also disappeared. The second page, X2, soon followed the exact same process of being structurally broken down and unmade atom by atom, until there was nothing left. It becomes terrifying to think what might happen if you wrote the equations for the missing number on another human being. While their testing has yet to produce any tangible results, the Foundation staff always make sure they transfer the missing number onto a whiteboard or chalkboard whenever studying it. Upon doing so, researchers are instructed to incinerate the paper that SCP-033 was written on previously, preventing multiple instances of Theta Prime and hopefully stopping the number from spreading any further. Any researchers observing or experimenting with SCP-033 must do so within a safe distance, away from computers and other devices. Testing can only occur for a maximum of 42 minutes before the missing number will destroy the surface it is written on, or fade from view. While dangerous, volatile, and potentially hugely destructive if it ever fell into the wrong hands, Theta Prime is a strangely insightful SCP. Knowing there exists a missing number must be similar to how mathematicians felt about the introduction of variables. You will probably have seen these a lot in your algebra homework, find the value of x and so on. Like SCP-033, that is also a number that cannot fully exist in our reality unless you figure out its value. It influences the calculations you have to make to find it, but it cannot be seen or understood fully at first. Perhaps there will come a day where we can store the missing number properly, but until then, we can only hope it never finds its way into our favorite notebook. It was 1948 in Villa Blanca, Guatemala. As night fell, two young boys, Carlos and Miguel, played a game of soccer in the street. It was a quiet town full of humble, hard-working people, and they were about to come face to face with a monster. Typically, when something like this happened, you'd know exactly who to call, the SCP Foundation. Problem is, while these days we can generally depend on the hard-working agents and researchers of the Foundation to save us from any anomalous, supernatural threats with their tactics, expertise, and equipment.
it wasn't always this way. There was a time before the SCP Foundation became the titan of anomaly combating prowess it is today, and it's that time that we're focusing on today. It all comes back to a strange and violent creature wandering the darkened streets of Guatemala, or as Dr. Charles Ogden Gears proposed we call it, SCP-001, the prototype. SCP-001 is a topic that we've covered in a number of videos, but even then we can never quite capture the full scope of this wily designation. What is SCP-001 is probably one of the most loaded questions you can possibly ask a member of the SCP Foundation, and it may be your last, as the majority of the files under the SCP-001 umbrella are highly classified for pretty much everyone under Level 5 clearance. 001 covers a large number of potentially anomalous items, entities, and concepts, from the dreaded Scarlet King to the awe-inspiring Gate Guardian, to the very SCP Foundation itself, through the eyes of the charmingly incompetent Unusual Incidents Unit of the FBI. Perhaps they're all real, perhaps only one of them is, and the rest are in there as a smokescreen. Perhaps they're all fake, red herrings laid down to hide the trail to something even more secretive and fantastic. All we know is that 001 seemed to be gathered around a collection of loose themes. The beginnings of the Foundation, events or entities that could end the Foundation or even the world, and key formative moments in the Foundation's history. Dr. Gear's proposal for SCP-001 lies firmly in the latter camp, and if you keep watching and listening closely, you'll see exactly why. Back to Carlos and Miguel, the pair of 11-year-olds playing football on the quiet back streets of Villa Blanca. They were kicking the ball back and forth when they heard a strange screeching noise in the distance. At first they thought it was some kind of injured bird, squawking desperately for help. Being good kids, they didn't waste a second running into the action, heading further into the outskirts of town. However, the creature they encountered on that rural road was certainly no bird. When they first saw it hunched over a few meters in front of them, they thought it must have been a horribly injured man. He was deadly thin, with gray-brown skin that looked either bruised or burned. It was twitching and weeping, its chest heaving in heavy labored pants. Its limbs were jerking wildly, as though the creature was being electrocuted. "Hey mister, are you okay?" Carlos called out in Spanish. In that moment, what they had wrongly thought was a man just froze up, finally registering their presence. Immediately, the two boys knew something was wrong, as the creature slowly rose to its full height, well over 6 feet, towering over the two of them, even at a distance. They noticed something was wrong with its limbs. They were too long, well out of proportion with its human-sized torso. It didn't have hands and feet, at least not in the way that humans do. Instead, its slender ankles terminated in long black spikes, and its wrists each split off into 3 equally black claws. But worst of all was its face, if you could even call what that monster had a face. Its head was split in the middle by a huge mouth. At first, its gnarly lips were pursed, but they soon slid open with a low, rumbling roar. The boys could feel their knees shaking as they saw the monster's mouth full of long, rotten fangs. Something started sliding up the dark passage of the monster's throat. A translucent, milky blue sphere. Was that thing an eye? It made the two boys feel sick to even look at it. That's when the eye started to glow, and the space around the monster began to shimmer slightly, like some kind of terrible sorcery. As the two boys felt a strange force pulling at them, trying to tug them into the creature's embrace, they were suddenly jogged from their frightened paralysis and decided to finally make a run for it. There was no doubt about what had just happened. They'd encountered a demon in the flesh, intent on taking their souls straight to hell. When the two of them told their parents, they were met at first with disbelief. Two young boys saw something that frightened them in the dark, perhaps an animal, if anything at all, and they'd let their imaginations run wild. It was typical of children. However, things didn't seem quite so simple when more sightings started popping up. People all across the town of Villa Blanca started seeing this monster, all with matching descriptions. A huge, emaciated beast with a mouth for a face, its glowing blue eye nested inside. The natural excuses circulated at first.
Perhaps the creature was a local prankster in a costume. This would be comforting to believe, but how many pranksters in costumes can completely disappear before your very eyes? The monster's eye would glow, and just like that, it would simply vanish. As fear and paranoia began spreading through the town, people suggested that perhaps it was a case of mass hysteria, fear and panic taking over rationality. But by this point, things had gotten worse. Carlos and Miguel, the two boys who'd first discovered the demon on the back road, had become sick. They were experiencing severe nausea, vomiting, headaches, and diarrhea. Their bodies weakened. Lesions began developing on their skin. As their conditions deteriorated, and it seemed as though nobody was capable of treating them, a rumor spread that the monster was somehow inducing this sickness. The town doctor didn't have the expertise to diagnose it, but the boys were suffering from acute radiation sickness, and they wouldn't be the only ones. Many of the people who'd reported sightings and close encounters with the monster started coming down with severe radiation sickness. To the townspeople, it just seemed to be a demon spreading some invisible plague among them, but the horrors wouldn't stop there. It seemed that this demon also liked to take a more direct approach to harming the townsfolk, because not long after the sickness broke out, people started disappearing. There were never any bodies. The most that would ever be found were tattered items of clothing left at the site of the disappearances, or blood smeared across the walls or ground. Before they knew it, 7 of their people were gone. It seemed that, for all intents and purposes, God had abandoned them. They were playthings of the demon now. Thankfully for the townsfolk who weren't yet irradiated or vanished, an organization was forming, one that might be their only chance at salvation. Someday in the future, it would become known as the SCP Foundation, but it had a lot to learn before it got there. You see, the reason that this iteration of SCP-001 is known as the prototype is that, if Dr. Gears is to be believed, it may be the first anomalous entity that they ever truly faced. So naturally, getting the creature captured and contained didn't go quite as smoothly as most of their modern jobs, despite the comparative simplicity of this old threat. General Machoy, an ex-military operator that became part of what we'll once again call the precursors to the Foundation, led a research and recovery team into Villa Blanca to hunt down and retrieve the beast that had been causing all this misery and death among the townsfolk. However, this proved to be easier said than done. While its bestial appearance might fool people into thinking the monster was just a mindless animal, later writings on the creature would describe it as both incredibly cunning and terrifyingly fast. When a group of armed personnel first tried to engage the creature directly, they had no idea that they were walking right into the middle of a bloodbath. They believed they had it surrounded on another rural back road, advancing with assault rifles, when the creature flipped out and started killing them. The prototype proved to have frightening offensive capabilities. Its 3 dark claws easily carved through the armor of the soldiers trying desperately to contain it. The creature moved so fast that none of them could reliably draw a bead on it, and if any of them could, it was holding their severed head before they had a chance to squeeze the trigger. But death by the creature's claws was one of the more pleasant ways it could kill its victims. At one point during an engagement with precursor troops, it opened its mouth and unveiled its glowing blue eye. At this point, one of the soldiers screamed and suddenly seemed to be sucked inside of himself, completely disappearing. The prototype's blue eye glowed again, and it once again just teleported away from the scene. A number of soldiers who survived this altercation later needed to be treated for acute radiation sickness. Researchers eventually managed to figure out what was actually happening with the creature. It had the ability to manifest micro-singularities, tiny black holes that it used to both teleport from place to place and defend itself from attacks when necessary. These singularities wouldn't stick around for long, a few seconds at most, but they had the terrifying side effect of putting out massive amounts of radiation. This is why it was making so much of the town and the recovery team sick via mere proximity. Thankfully, in finding out the creature's strength, they also managed to find out its weaknesses. Its powers were dampened by high humidity, bright lights, and especially intense strobing lights. It was through the use of these lights that the creature was finally captured and brought into ADRX-19, a complex that would later become Site-19 for containment. There, its containment procedures were devised by one of the burgeoning organization's top minds, Dr. Herman Ketter. However, Dr. Ketter would sadly never actually live to see the duration of the prototype's containment at ADRX-19. He was tragically killed by the monster, though his name would live on as the designation for anomalies that were particularly difficult to contain. It was thanks to him that his coworkers realized lead-lined walls, a reinforced steel door, a 100% humidity environment, and the frequent application of high-intensity strobe lights were the best way to keep the prototype locked up for good. To this day, this iteration of SCP-001 is a fascinating reminder that the SCP Foundation wasn't always the juggernaut it is today. There was once a time where they had as little idea of what they were doing as the rest of us. There's no better representation of this than the file itself. It was an era before object classes and conventional designation numbers. The file is written in a sketchy, disorganized manner and arranged into item designation number, warning, description of item, detail of current containment, report, and addendum. As with any experience in life, it's always worth asking, what can we learn from the SCP Foundation's experience with its possible first anomaly, a monster that seems almost nostalgically quaint by today's standards? Perhaps the greatest message is that everything is a work in progress. It was only by determination and persistence that the Foundation could go from an organization challenged by a monster like the Prototype to going toe-to-toe with real heavy hitters like the Scarlet King. How very inspirational. A veteran worker of the SCP Foundation sits at his terminal, performing one of the most critical tasks in the entire organization, creating a file for an as-yet undescribed SCP. But there's something terribly wrong. His eyes are glazed over. His mouth hangs open. Is this a zombie or a trained Foundation researcher? What is going on? Like any large international organization, it takes more than just the exciting, action-filled jobs to keep the wheels turning at the SCP Foundation. Sure, the head researchers, guards, mobile task force soldiers, and members of the O5 Command get all the praise, but a legion of number crunchers, cleaners, and paper pushers are equally important. One such person was archivist Walter Bainbridge, who had been tasked with digitizing some of the older records that the Foundation had on file. It was when he was innocently recording the details on SCP-050 through 060 that he first came under the strange and startling effects of SCP-055. But the most peculiar part, as with all incidents of SCP-055's anomalous effects taking hold, is that Walter had no idea any of it was happening. In his new digitized filing system, he first took note of SCP-053, Euclid class, also known as the Young Girl. This anomaly was a seemingly normal human female child who provoked homicidal insanity in those directly exposed to her. Then SCP-054, Safe class, a non-aggressive humanoid female made entirely of, as well as biologically and chemically identical to regular spring water. Next, SCP-056, Euclid class, a being that changes form to suit its environment, but only when all observers lose focus of it. And then SCP-057, Safe class, an underground chamber that crushes the humans who walk within. It was at this point that Walter received a concerned message from one of his superiors at Site-19, Mr. Kovac. The message praised the thorough digitization of the other anomalies' records, but was confused about why Walter had left out any mention of SCP-055. Immediately, Walter was embarrassed. How could he have forgotten SCP-055? That iconic anomaly known for... well, he couldn't quite say off the top of his head, but he'd be sure to look into it. A quick trip to the Site-19 archive showed him that there was actually quite a hefty file on the nature of SCP-055, which must have been the result of a huge number of studies. What struck him as strange was that all the files were filled out in pen rather than being typed up like a traditional file. The majority of these notes were written in shorthand too, as though they were frantically taken during the tests themselves on extremely short notice. There weren't even any redactions. Walter made a mental note of what he had seen, put the file back in its proper place, and headed back to his computer terminal. However, after writing in an almost trance-like state, he looked back on his work to see that he had written an entry on SCP-058, a giant evil bovine heart with insect legs and a scorpion stinger. Strange, he thought. That's when Walter got a call from Mr. Kovac on his Foundation-issue phone, and he didn't sound happy. He'd given Walter direct instructions to go back and digitize the files on 055, and instead he'd been working on 058, What was the meaning of this? Walter was typically an extremely loyal and diligent employee, but the verbal barrage from his supervisor had him considering talking back, just this once, and hoping it didn't get him demoted to D class and thrown into 682's acid bath for playtime. Walter gulped, picked up some courage, and interrupted Mr. Kovach's rant to ask if he had any idea what SCP-055 actually was. The line went silent for a moment, then his supervisor spoke again, this time with less confidence. Of course I can tell you about SCP-055. It's a classic, one of the first 100. How could you forget it's, I think it's the one with, Another long pause as Mr. Kovach seemed to search for the words, but instead just trailed off into silence. Knowing that some of the anomalies on file were dangerous mimetic hazards, Walter was worried for a moment that he may have accidentally killed his boss by getting him to think too hard about SCP-055. He asked if Mr. Kovach was okay, and finally got a reply. I'm sorry, I seem to have zoned out for a second there. What were we talking about again? But this time it was Walter who couldn't answer. He had no idea at all what the two of them were discussing just moments ago. He felt disoriented and kind of sick, like they'd taken some low-level amnestics. Mr. Kovach told Walter to get back to his filing duties, and they'd speak later. Walter then checked the messages he'd received from Mr. Kovach earlier, and there it was, plain as day. You missed 055. Go back and digitize that before proceeding, Mr. K. But Walter had never even heard of an SCP-055 if such an anomaly even existed. What was going on here? In that moment, Walter realized he was dealing with something much stranger than just a standard digitization job. After all, how could he properly complete his duties if SCP-055 seemed to be impossible to speak, write, or even think about, unless he were directly observing it at that moment? Walter had to know, and ask around the entirety of Site-19 to find the answers if he had to. Sadly for Walter, he was about to embark on a much more challenging task than he could have ever imagined. To paraphrase a supposed quote from Socrates, all I know is that I know nothing, and that's also about the extent of the knowledge we have on SCP-055, also known as the anti-meme and the self-keeping secret. What does it look like? When and how was it obtained by the Foundation? What are its anomalous abilities? Is this thing dangerous? We may never know, because the only anomalous ability of SCP-055 that we're aware of is the fact that nobody is capable of retaining any information about it. It's crucial to note that whatever 055 is, it isn't invisible or indescribable. Foundation personnel are perfectly capable of entering its containment chamber and observing it without incident, but mere minutes after leaving the chamber, any memories of the particulars of 055 seem to spontaneously erase themselves. Hence, the self-keeping secret. But this didn't deter Walter. Perhaps his greatest advantage was that he didn't know enough about the thing he was investigating to know how futile his mission was. He wanted to know the unknowable, and a pesky issue like impossibility wouldn't stop him. He'd get to whoever he needed to at Site-19 to get the answers he needed. Of course, most people had no knowledge of the mysterious anomaly. The common response he got back from his colleagues was, 055? Do we even have a 055? While the realization of sudden memory loss, or the realization of 055's existence, has been known to cause momentary stress, there are no known long-term physical or mental effects from 055's anomalous abilities. It's a fleeting idea in its purest form, like forgetting why you walked into a room. 055 could be the most harmless object on the Foundation's roster, or the most deadly. Either way, we just don't know. At times, Walter worried he was going insane. 055 and everything related to it was gaslighting him. Was 055 even real? The one thing that proved to him that 055 must have existed is that its containment chamber existed. According to the official records kept by the Foundation on the Site-19 containment facilities, 055 is kept in a 5x5 by 2.5 meter square room, constructed of 50-foot thick cement, with a Faraday cage surrounding the cement walls. The report continues that, Access is via a heavy containment door measuring 2 by 2.5 meters, constructed on bearings to ensure door closes and locks automatically unless held open deliberately. 055 cell is one of the few to have no posted security guards, and any personnel working on other SCPs in the area are ordered to remain at least 50 feet from the geometric center of 055 cell, where the anomaly itself is kept. When he tried to explore further why the cell was constructed in this manner, he found that, surprise surprise, nobody knew. 055 was an anomaly whose containment requirements were so mysterious that it automatically netted itself a Keter class designation. After all, how can you properly contain something you can't even hope to comprehend? There were plenty of rumors about the true nature of 055. Some of the more conspiratorial minds at Site-19 theorized that 055 was actually an autonomous or remotely controlled spy inserted into the site to observe Foundation operations, or even humanity as a whole. If you're on the more paranoid end of the psychological spectrum, this theory makes total sense. An anomaly that's physically impossible to remember, even when writings and pictures on the subject exist, would be a perfect spy. However, this was all ultimately little more than speculation. Walter was barely any further along than when he started. There were multiple points in his investigations where Walter seriously considered giving up, until finally, he had a major breakthrough. Dr. Bartholomew Hughes and Dr. John Marichek were two scientists that had performed extensive research into 055, and who, Walter hoped, might have the answers he sought about the self-keeping secret. These scientists were the first to discover the anti-memetic nature of 055, performing numerous tests on D-Class personnel to see if it was possible to create feasible written records, sketches, or any other records or impressions that could bypass its anomalous effects. The disorienting, memory-ruining effects of 055 also extend to any materials concerning 055. It seems to be a truly uncrackable code, but Dr. Hughes may have finally found some cracks in the armor. For starters, the fact that we're able to remember that 055 is an anti-memetic is an ironic exception to its anti-memetic qualities. This revelation also inspired another realization from Dr. Hughes. Would it be possible to discover more about 055 from the process of deduction rather than the typical induction? In other words, could they possibly learn about 055 by figuring out all the things it isn't rather than what it is? Dr. Marichek designed an experiment with Dr. Hughes to explore this theory. They designed the experiment around a simple question: is 055 not spherical? In designing the question to specifically find out what 055 isn't, they hoped to subvert the anomaly's anti-memetic powers. Walter was fascinated by this potential method of getting answers. Marichek and Hughes found that, while the questioning process for those exposed was often arduous and frustrating, they could now definitely say that 055 is not a sphere. It is theoretically possible to discover the true nature of 055 by an almost endless barrage of deductive questions, though whether Command would authorize the resources for such extensive testing is still an open question. Walter in his desperation begged Marichek and Hughes for clearance to view 055 himself. The curiosity had become too great during his search to just walk away with the single fact that 055 wasn't spherical. He needed to see this thing. And after several weeks of filling out forms and cutting red tape, his wish was finally granted. Walter Bainbridge was allowed a private audience with SCP-055, the subject of his months-long obsession. Outsiders observed that Walter spent just over an hour in the containment chamber, taking photos, drawing sketches, writing down notes, recording audio logs, and reciting memory mnemonics. He was pulling out every stop to counteract the anti-memetic effects of the self-keeping secret. He was adamant that he would not be defeated by his non-spherical nemesis, not after all this time and effort. Once his time in the 055 containment chamber was over, he retired back to his office to finally digitize his exhaustive findings, so that his supervisor, Mr. Kovac, would finally get off his back. Walter smiled, took a deep breath, and began to type. SCP-059, Keter Class, This anomaly is a radioactive mineral that emits a unique radiation known as delta radiation. Exposure to this radiation has caused strange fungal growths on the infected... Wait, what was this supposed to be about again? Oh well, it couldn't have been that important.
Let's get one thing clear. As much as it is fun to go through the various articles on the SCP archive, we should take a moment to acknowledge that it's all fun and games. The SCP Foundation, all the entities and objects, creatures and people, places and stories related to them are just that, stories. Fiction created by the authors of an online wiki website. It's all designed to be a bit of harmless entertainment. But what if it isn't harmless? What if the characters within the world of the SCP archive somehow knew they had been created by the SCP wiki authors? What would happen if fiction was aware that it was, in fact, fictional? Ask yourself, would you want to know if your world, your life, everything you had ever seen or known was just all fantasy? If the answer is no, then you need to stop watching this video right now, but we'll warn you. Just because you don't know about something doesn't necessarily stop it from being true. Still want to find out what's going on? Good. Then you need to hear about SCP-001. First things first, which of the various SCP-001s are we talking about? Anyone looking for the earliest SCP will quickly discover that there are many different entities and anomalies that share that number. There are a few in-universe reasons for this. One is that all these anomalies were discovered in the earliest days of the SCP Foundation, before their current numbering system was introduced. Then there's the other theories. For example, some have speculated that the existence of many different SCP-001s is an intentional misdirection by the Foundation, their way of keeping the nature of the first true SCP a closely guarded secret. Regardless of what the reason is, the SCP-001 we're looking at today is also known as the database. Any and all information about the database is kept secret from the entire SCP Foundation apart from the Overseer Council. And why is it such a secret? Well, that's because SCP-001 contains details of the very nature of the Foundation itself, including its creation. But we don't mean when and how the organization was founded, or its history. We mean how it was created, and by whom in our reality. Confused? Well, allow us to explain it. At first, the file for SCP-001 describes a group of humanoid entities that have the ability to influence reality. All sounds like pretty standard bread and butter stuff for the SCP Foundation, right? Wrong. These entities are, in fact, the authors of the SCP Wiki themselves, as in the people in the real world. The reality of the SCP Foundation is constantly changed by these writers, written and rewritten whenever someone edits an article on the SCP Wiki. That's all fine and harmless for us, but the Wiki authors' impact on their world is cause of grave concern for the Foundation. As we mentioned at the start, we all know that the SCP Foundation and its vast catalog of user-generated articles on the creative and the creepy are nothing more than a source of fictional online entertainment. It can be fun to study the lore and the nuances of the different SCPs. It can be enjoyable appreciating the creativity and hard work that the authors put into writing them. In the case of fanfiction, independent stories, original SCPs, or even animated videos dedicated to explaining them. It can even inspire and fuel our own written endeavors. But at the end of the day, when all is said and done, we all know that the SCP Foundation is purely fictional. What we don't realize is that the Foundation knows it too. Containing several pieces of information from within their own archive, the database contains everything the Foundation knows about our real world. This includes everything about the real authors of the SCP Wiki. And you thought Deadpool was meta. You see, because the SCP Wiki has articles from numerous different creative writers, chances are the details of every new article might not always line up with every previous one. For a long time, there has been much discussion amongst devoted SCP fans regarding the canon of the website. Now, we don't mean a big gun that launches metal balls. When we say canon, we mean all of the events and stories that are considered to be an official part of the ongoing story of the SCP Foundation. Still with us so far? Because there are so many writers and articles on the wiki, the canon of the SCP archive is a bit inconsistent to say the least.
And that's fine for us, because we know none of it is real. It doesn't have to all line up, just as long as a good story is being told. But these inconsistencies, all the little cracks of discrepancy and disparity, are what made the Foundation themselves realize that they are truly living in a fiction. In other words, SCP-001 is the SCP Foundation's window through what we would experience as the fourth wall. The fourth wall is the metaphorical barrier that separates what we know to be real from what we know to be purely fiction. In other words, it's the line between the audience and the fiction that they are watching, the edge of the stage or the glass of the television screen. And the SCP Foundation is staring through that fourth wall, looking out at you and me. That's right. It isn't just the authors that the Foundation are aware of. It's all of us. According to their own researchers, the Foundation has determined that we, the audience, and the writers exist in something known as the alpha layer. What on earth is an alpha layer? Well, imagine our reality. The world and the universe as we know it is a slice of bread. It's a strange analogy, we know, but stick with us. Now picture the fictional world of the SCP Foundation as another slice of bread underneath ours. In between the two can be whatever you like. But the point isn't that the world is a sandwich. The point is that we exist on a layer of reality above that of the SCP Wiki, and the filling is just what keeps reality and fiction separate. So as we mentioned, the Foundation is aware of any writers and readers of the SCP Wiki, and this does include you. But the Wiki authors are the primary focus of the database. After all, it's the writers who are responsible for creating the fictional world that the SCP Foundation exists in. Anything that forms a part of the narrative of that world, every article, every tale, every new SCP that gets published, even parts of the wiki that get taken down or rewritten all have an impact on the Foundation's universe. When the authors link their new SCPs to pre-existing ones, or create connections to a group of interest like the Church of the Broken God or the Global Occult Coalition, their writing ends up making even more of a substantial development to the overall narrative. And all of it ends up in the database. The readers of the SCP Wiki, on the other hand, are a smaller part of SCP-001, mainly because they do not write or publish the content found on the website itself. Anything that is not specifically set in stone by a wiki author can be interpreted in various ways by a reader. A reader's interpretation is a powerful concept and should not be underestimated. Interpretation is the difference between reading Animal Farm as a story about a group of animals rebelling against their human farmer, and understanding it as a satirical and political allegory for the events leading up to the Russian Revolution. So what does interpretation have to do with SCP-001? The point we are getting at is that any unwritten detail or anything that isn't explicitly stated by a wiki author can be changed by a reader's own imagination. This can be anything, from the appearance or personality of an SCP or character, to a detail about the world of the Foundation. And in the same vein, if something in one SCP article contradicts something written in another, the reader is free to choose which of them they accept as part of the universe's true canon. Each reader of the SCP Wiki has their own understanding of the material written there, and inevitably comprehends their own version of the events within. And this is something that the SCP Foundation, even in their world of fiction, is aware of. Or more specifically, the O5 Council is aware of. You see, the secretive overseers are the only ones with any true knowledge of SCP-001. Only they can access the database. Only they know the truth. The fact that they exist in this fictional capacity is something the Overseer Council hopes to hide from the rest of the Foundation's personnel. In an effort to keep the rest of their staff from asking too many questions, the Council has told them that there is currently no way in existence that they could possibly contain SCP-001. But to reassure personnel, the O5s have also stated that this does not pose any risk, nor would it lead to the total and utter destruction of their observable fictional universe. Instead, the Council aims to focus on what they can control, by containing any and all information about SCP-001. Nothing about the database or the truth that it contains is to ever leave O5 Command under any circumstances whatsoever. All of the information about SCP-001, or what it contains, is kept in an encrypted, highly classified form at an unknown location. The key needed to decrypt this data is a passcode split into 3 parts. This key is then memorized by members of the O5 Council, each memorizing a different portion of the passcode. It can only be accessed if every member of the Council unanimously agrees that it is absolutely necessary. And even when they do decrypt the information about SCP-001, it remains for the eyes of O5 Command, and strictly their eyes only. Any member of the SCP Foundation caught leaking data about SCP-001 is to be contained by any means necessary. This also includes if a member of personnel attempts to get this classified information out via espionage, psychic leakage, or other devious methods. Foundation researchers are even banned from conducting any of their own investigations into the nature of SCP-001 or the data it contains. If a lower-level staff member was somehow to find out the truth, that the entire Foundation is just a fiction, then that person would be at the mercy of the most senior figure on the O5 Council. It would be up to that senior figure to decide the staff member's fate. Anyone with high enough clearance or status within the Foundation who found out about SCP-001 would alternatively be given a Class A amnestic. These are memory-altering drugs that the SCP Foundation uses to keep information about anomalies a secret, apparently even from its own staff. Still, having your mind wiped has got to be better than being killed or contained, just for realizing you're a fictional character on an online wiki. The O5 Council has plans in mind for us, and for the SCP wiki writers responsible for creating them. The SCP wiki entry on the database closes with a proposal, a way that the O5 Council can reach out of their fiction directly to the wiki's authors in the real world. From there, their goal is simple. Through memetic kill agents, the SCP Foundation will put the wiki authors to sleep and then kill them. Sounds pretty far-fetched, doesn't it? After all, when was the last time something fictional killed someone in our real world? Even more bizarre, what if this kill agent really exists? The O5 Council must have known for a while that their world is fictional, so they've had plenty of time to develop a kill agent, some way of reaching us and the SCP wiki authors in the real world. Worse still, what if this kill agent is already out there somewhere, lurking on the SCP archive, just waiting for you to find it? And if you read it, how would it kill you? If you don't want to know, then that's your choice to make. But if curiosity is getting the better of you, then remember this. Beware SCP-5999. Hold on. Before we begin this video, there's something really important we need you to do. Just remember this phrase while you're watching. It's crucial that you don't let these 4 words slip out of your head even for a split second. You can even pause the video and repeat the sentence to yourself a few times, just to get it to fully sink in. Remember please, belief is the key. We have all wondered at one point or another what happens after our lives draw to their inevitable close and we take our last breath in the land of the living. What happens to us? It's a question that has baffled scientists and philosophers all over the world for almost as long as human civilization has existed. What happens after we die? Well, the answer to that particular question normally varies depending on who you choose to ask. There are, as you probably already know, numerous beliefs held by all religions and cultures around the globe, that there exists an afterlife. While the description of the afterlife is often dependent on the religious or cultural group it is linked to, the concept usually revolves around the soul leaving the body after death and living forever in eternal paradise. That is, of course, unless you've committed sin during your lifetime, which normally results in being sent down to spend eternity in punishment instead of paradise. But sadly, there's no way to prove which, if any, of the various afterlives actually exist. By their very nature, these afterlives exist separate from the real physical world that we live in while we are still alive. Stuck here on Earth, we can only observe what we see happening after death, and what we assume it might be like. After all, it's not like a dead person can tell us what being dead is like. Well, under usual circumstances anyway. With no proof of the afterlife's existence, we do unfortunately get left with the bleak and existentially horrifying assumption that, when we die, there is nothing waiting for us on the other side. No light at the end of the tunnel, no pearly gates, just nothing. Forever. Of course, being unconscious for eternity isn't quite as bad as the other possibility. What could that other possibility be? Well, according to the SCP Foundation's entry for SCP-2718, you might not want to know. Anyone attempting to access the data file on SCP-2718 will immediately notice a few details that set it apart from others contained in the Foundation's archive. Firstly, an ever-changing SCP number. It perpetually swaps numbers with other files to keep itself hidden. Next, a unique object class that is only found in this entry. Instead of Keter or Euclid or Safe class that you might expect, you'll read Dämmerung, a German word that loosely translates to either dusk, dawn, twilight, or nightfall. You might also spot the Anomaly special containment procedures, mentioning that this page of the SCP database has been specially constructed in such a way that makes it as difficult as possible to access. The entry itself even begs the person reading it not to go any further, not to look at the description of SCP-2718. Now, we all know that the Foundation goes to great lengths to keep some things a secret, but why all the added measures for SCP-2718? It might well be that the information contained behind all this extra security could change the lives of anyone that reads it. Or, to put it more accurately, it could change the afterlives of whoever learns what SCP-2718 really is. This anomaly isn't a nightmarish creature or an object with a strange function. It's not an entity from outside our universe, or even a person with an unusual origin. SCP-2718 is a Cognitohazard, a piece of information that poses a direct danger to anyone that is able to understand it. That's why the Foundation has so many pleas to not read it any further. They're not doing that to protect the organization and their secrets, but to try and protect the reader themselves.
All personnel, regardless of clearance, are forbidden to expose themselves to the description of this article under any circumstances. Do not discuss the existence of this article with any person. No disciplinary action will be necessary, provided you close this article now and clear your browser cache.
Sounds serious, right? So serious, in fact, that anyone trying to learn about SCP-2718 is actively discouraged to do so. Even members of Foundation personnel are offered exemption from punishment if they just do what they're told and turn away. But you still want to know, don't you? Alright, don't say we didn't try our best to warn you. You've ignored all the signs, the repeated warnings to not look any further into SCP-2718, to not look at its description or pass that information on to anyone else. No, you just had to keep digging deeper and deeper, didn't you? Searching for the answers you're going to wish you never had gone looking for in the first place. Push far enough through the security measures the Foundation has placed around the SCP-2718 file, and you'll find a transcribed audio recording from none other than a member of the O5 Council. The Councilwoman Miriam Prather, O5-7, speaks to a subordinate, who begins the recording. As it starts, she talks about how the various members of the O5 Council have used various anomalous means and sometimes other SCPs to artificially extend their lifespans. The Council is functionally immortal. Boring, right? Anyone who knows enough about the SCP Foundation already knows that functional immortality is what has kept the O5s in power for so many decades. But what you might not know is that there was one Council member who didn't. His name was Roger Sheldon. Despite being offered each of the 19 known methods of extending life that the other overseers have gladly used, Sheldon refused each and every one. Instead, he would often go on vacations away from the Foundation, without announcing his intention to do so. Both doing this and refusing to become immortal in some ways are actions that are now forbidden for any member of the O5 Council, presumably because of Roger. On one of his impromptu trips away, Roger Sheldon died from a stroke. Given that he didn't let anyone know where he was planning on going, he was sadly left to rot after his death. However, Roger possessed an important anomalous artifact in his possession at all times, meaning that the SCP Foundation was keen to recover his body and, by extension, this object. He also had knowledge of a unique keyword, a phrase referred to as a shibboleth, which the other overseers needed to extract from Sheldon. But how do you get information from a dead man? Well, you bring him back to life, of course. And we're not talking about the normal kind of resurrection the Foundation often indulges in, which is really just glorified cloning. This is the ripping of an actual soul back from the void, and placing it inside its body once more, so it can live again as it once did. Eventually, after 14 years of searching, Roger Sheldon's remains were exhumed and then returned to the Foundation. There, his personal belongings were recovered, including the mysterious artifact. Then, just as planned, they revived Roger in order to recover the shibboleth from his memory. The O5 Council had commissioned the creation of a brand new body for Roger, one that perfectly matched his old one in every conceivable detail. And it worked. What was odd was that the formerly deceased overseer, who had refused to extend his lifespan and live forever, seemed overjoyed to be brought back from the dead. The resurrection seemed to work exactly as intended, even better in fact, with Roger now firmly back among the living. He appeared to have a newfound interest in preserving human life and empathy for others that he'd never shown before. Sheldon was concerned about personnel safety and containment protocols in a way he hadn't been before his stroke. But this apparent compassion was underscored by something else: caution. Roger never went anywhere without an entourage of medical staff and bodyguards, almost frightened of how fragile life was. You might think there's nothing too alarming about this behavior, that maybe death had given Sheldon a new perspective, an appreciation for the delicate nature of human life. But it was more than that. It was an unprecedented fear, a phobia of allowing people, anyone, to die. Then came Roger Sheldon's most unpredictable course of action. Acting against all regulations and Foundation protocols, he secretly rushed into the containment chamber of SCP-106. This anomaly is a humanoid that secretes a black goop from its body, capable of dragging human beings into a pocket dimension that it controls and uses to torture its victims. Sheldon was trying to make some kind of bargain with SCP-106 when he was detained by Miriam Prather. When told to explain his actions, Roger Sheldon eventually gave them his horrifying testimony. The reason he'd been so afraid and so cautious after his resurrection. He knew what happened after death. Cast your mind back to the start of this video. All that talk about afterlives and what really happens to us after we die. Well, there is one answer to that question that doesn't often cross people's minds. In fact, everyone who ponders the question what happens after subconsciously tries to overlook it, because to even think it's possible presents a whole horde of horrors in itself. What could be such a terrifying thought that we all hope it simply isn't true? It's the simple, horrible possibility that has hardly occurred to anyone throughout human history, that the dead remain conscious after their bodies have shut down. They remain aware of everything that happens to them. They are able to feel themselves slowly decaying, bones and skin withering away, buried under the cold, wasting away into nothingness day after day. That is what SCP-2718 is. After suffering his stroke, Roger Sheldon explained how he could still feel everything happening to him. Skin blistered and split in the sunlight. Biting insects descended rapidly. I felt eggs hatch. Larvae crawl, gases build and burst within me. Individual cells rupturing, interstitial fluids souring and blackening. Somehow my capacity to experience and store these sensations grew. I was aware of every fingernail and strand of hair that pulled away in the wind. He went on describing every horror he'd experienced in lurid detail as his body broke down in real time, knowing that those same images and thoughts would never leave his head. Shocked by the revelation, Miriam and the other overseer rushed to hold a meeting of the rest of the O5 Council, wherein Roger once again described his posthumous experience. Hearing what happens after death drove every council member mad, each reacting with shock, stress, and anger. One of them tried to calm the rest down, while another motioned to treat death itself as a Keter-class SCP and neutralize it. The chaos was eventually quelled when O5-1 silenced the other O5s, activating Emergency Protocol 17 to gas the overseers with amnestics to wipe their memories of what they had learned. Only Roger and -7 were able to escape the room before the bulkhead sealed and the gas was deployed. Roger believed that people had a right to know about SCP-2718. Agreeing with him, Miriam created a log of all she knew about what happens after death, then permanently locking it within the SCP database, protected from ever being deleted or having its description altered. However, on the orders of O5-1, Miriam was gunned down by Foundation personnel, leaving Roger to escape. Presumably, he returned to SCP-106, agreeing to be tortured forever in the creature's pocket dimension. To him, that was preferable to dying. So if you now know what SCP-2718 is, then why did we start this video with the phrase, "belief is the key"? Well, as we said earlier, this anomaly is a cognitohazard. It's a phenomenon that only occurs after you are exposed to a certain piece of information. That knowledge is what's being contained here, within the entry left by 05-7. You see, it's actually knowing what happens to you after death that makes SCP-2718 happen. If you spend your life believing in a version of the afterlife, only to then learn about SCP-2718, then that information will override whatever religion, culture, or faith led you to believe about death. Knowing about SCP-2718 overwrites your afterlife. It creates a new, endless, and meaningless pain as you experience every sensation beyond your death. Decay, decomposition, cremation. That's the reason that belief is the key. Because once you are exposed to it, SCP-2718 becomes what happens after you die. In our defense, we warned you. Hello again. It's good to have you back. And yes, we really do mean you. We're aware that you watch a lot of these videos, drinking in all that classified information about some of the SCP Foundation's most top-secret anomalies. You probably think you're pretty slick, don't you? As if nobody could see you peering in. And even if they could, they wouldn't remember it soon after. Yes, you're a very clever anomaly. We wouldn't even think of arguing against that. That's why this video is about you, SCP-3393. Don't be alarmed, we're on the same page here. We know that you access these files, particularly the files regarding yourself and your own activities. We know that you're on the shy side, and we definitely appreciate that. Unlike our other shy guy, you don't brutally murder everyone who witnesses you. Your greatest crime is accessing and even tampering with SCP Foundation files without permission. But seeing as the Foundation is cold, not cruel, we can forgive that little indiscretion of yours for the greater good. All we ask for is your attention and a few minutes of your time. You're a vain creature, who or whatever you are. So we know you wouldn't even resist the opportunity to hear what we have to say about you. And for the record, you are one of the few people who are actually witnessing this video in the way you're witnessing it right now. It's for your eyes only, so to speak, SCP-3393. This video, its description, and even the coding of its comments section is filled with state-of-the-art memetic agents cooked up by our best and brightest. To everyone except you, the researcher heading your case, the head of the Anti-Memetics Division, and a single member of the O5 Council, this is just your average run-of-the-mill video. This is a private conversation between you and the Foundation, SCP-3393. We hope you don't mind the designation. It's not like we know your real name, but we can make some rather educated guesses. We actually know very little about you on the whole, a fact we hope to change in the future. Much like several other anomalies we have files on, such as SCP-055, the Self-Keeping Secret, and SCP-2256, the Very Tall Things, information recorded about you isn't exactly sustainable. It becomes forgotten or unreadable shortly after it's noted down. It's a clever anomalous ability, and one we've only been able to counteract with the application of powerful amnestic drugs. But clearly that isn't the only thing you have going for you. How do you think you've been able to access all of these videos, filled with classified information about anomalies, groups of interest, and even the inner workings of the Foundation itself? Through methods currently unknown to us, you've been able to somehow give your account level 4 clearance, giving you free reign over almost every file available. As much as it shames us to admit it, we haven't been able to remove this unpermitted clearance from your account, or even locate it for that matter. Like we've said before, you're a very clever anomaly. We respect that about you, even though you've been using this apparently crafty sapiens to inconvenience us. Our best guess is that you owe much of your success to powerful anti-memetic properties inherent to your anomalous being. But if we're off the mark on that, do feel free to enlighten us. Speaking of guesses, let's get back to what we think we know about you. After all, that's why you're really here, isn't it? No point being bashful, SCP-3393. You may be good at hiding yourself, but your intentions are plain as day. You don't need to be a senior researcher here to intuit that much about you.
The following are all facts we believe we know about you with 90% confidence. You'll have to let us know how close we were in the end. Assumption number 1. You are a corporeal entity. That's right. You probably wanted us to assume that you were some kind of digital ghost, didn't you? Some mysterious, ethereal thought form existing only in the realm of cyberspace while you sneak around Site-31 making mischief. We're afraid that the ghost has been given up, so to speak. As clever as you are, it isn't quite as clever as you believe yourself to be. You've gotten sloppy at times, and in these moments you've given us a wealth of evidence. Don't you think the Foundation researchers and guards, people trained to notice even the most minute anomalous interference, wouldn't notice doors opening and closing on their own? Equipment moving, computer terminals activated despite no digital trace of approved Foundation login credentials. We must say we're a little insulted by how much you've underestimated us here. We know the files you've accessed. We know that you're aware of some of the monstrosities the Foundation deals with: ghosts, deadly viruses, reality warpers, some creatures that can shapeshift or become invisible, deadly memes for goodness sake. Did you really think our personnel would see the signs of your meddling and think, it was probably nothing? That's a rather dangerous oversight on your part. Assumption number 2. You're attracted to information about yourself. Don't try to deny this one, SCP-3393. The fact you're still watching this video is proof of your self-obsession, and you've left your digital fingerprints all over any other file that made the mistake of mentioning you. We have pages upon pages of logs showing your long record of unauthorized access, and the grand majority of the files you accessed were about you. Like we said, you're a vain little creature. That much is plain to see. This leads us nicely on to assumption number 3. You seek out this information about yourself in order to make changes to it, or even delete it entirely if it displeases you. We'll admit this one we find the most frustrating. It's one thing to access files without our permission, quite another to mess with our hard work. We get enough problems from Technical Director Rosen already without needing to constantly pester him about improving file security. The file about you has undergone a number of needless modifications and deletions. The following was a personal favorite. Quote, Object Class Euclid. Special Containment Procedures. Don't worry, I can handle this. Description. I wasn't supposed to happen. I wasn't supposed to exist. At least, not like this. But let me deal with it. This thing that I am is best kept away from all of you. Don't try to analyze me or test me or whatever. I don't want any of you to catch what I have. Just call me self-containing and we'll be good. End quote. We suppose you thought this one was pretty funny, right? You're clearly an intelligent creature, who or whatever you are, but the clear arrogance on display here doesn't suit you. While you may coast off of your anti-memetic properties, it is important to remember that you aren't untouchable. Speaking of which, assumption number 4. Your anti-memetic properties can be transferred. We found this to be a particular interesting wrinkle in your story. We know you've got a sense of humor, so you'll have to appreciate the irony in your attempts to alter or destroy information about yourself, telling us more about you than we ever knew before. Initially, when other files were reported missing, we thought you must have been deleting them out of spite. However, upon further examination, we found that the files were still very much there, and you were the last user to access them. This is perhaps the most dangerous thing about you, and we don't even know if you knew it until now. Your anti-memetic properties have a tendency to rub off and affect the things you interact with. With a power like that, you could compromise the whole database. And obviously, we can't allow that to happen. Assumption number 5. You have a strong resistance to memetic agents, much to our frustration. We know that they can affect you, of course, but your tolerance is far higher than that of the average human being. We needed to load this video with some of our very best just to make sure it would actually work. Your memetic resistance has even foiled certain prior containment attempts. So you've really been making us earn our keep, SCP-3393. Assumption number 6. You are confined to Site-31. This is another inconvenient truth for you, isn't it? First, we need to figure out you're a corporeal being, existing out here in space-time with the rest of us, and then we figure out exactly which space and time you're occupying. Can you feel the net tightening around you, 3393? Of course, we don't want you to be nervous. Just sit tight and enjoy the video.
You're a very clever anomaly after all, far too clever to be contained by the likes of us. You've been performing your operations right under the noses of Site-31's most talented personnel. All the phenomenon we've been attributing to you, from the open doors to the tampered computer terminals, have occurred exclusively in Site-31. And while we may not be able to track down your account and strip it of its phony clearances, did you know we can log which computer terminals unauthorized access to our files comes from? That's just basic cybersecurity, and we don't need to tell you that all of your unauthorized accesses have been logged to Site-31 terminals. Very sloppy, 3393. Or should we call you Dr. Mackey? Forgive us if that isn't your name. We hate to jump to conclusions here at the Foundation, but we couldn't help but notice that your anomalous activity began shortly after a researcher named Dr. Mackey disappeared from Site-31. Interestingly, much like you, Dr. Mackey isn't remembered by anyone else on the site. We only know Dr. Mackey worked here from records we discovered not too long ago. We know that Dr. Mackey was conducting experiments here, though data on the particulars of those experiments have been destroyed by you, we presume. We also presume that you were most likely either Dr. Mackey or the product of one of Dr. Mackey's experiments. We've made a few attempts to nab you already, but you've always slipped through the cracks. Like the sweep of Site-31 where we sent in MTF Eta-10 See No Evil, our team that specializes in combating visual cognitohazards. Those guys are tough cookies, and they're damn good at their job, so it is a mystery how you evaded them. Our current best guess is that you were hiding in some undocumented location within the site. Our attempts at memetic incapacitation were equally unsuccessful. As we mentioned before, it's clear that you have a greater resilience to memetic agents than any of your non-anomalous counterparts. We estimate that even a kill agent would probably do little more than weaken you. That is impressive, we'll give you that. Our estimation for why you've been able to so handedly thwart our attempts at containing you is that your access to the system has also given you access to all of our plans. You know exactly what's going on before we even execute the attempt, giving you time to think up and execute an effective countermeasure. But we here at the Foundation believe that knowledge is power, SCP-3393, and we have more than enough to finally contain you. Don't panic, it's already essentially over, but we'll do you the courtesy of explaining how we got you in the end. Welcome to Operation Bait the Hook. We know you're within Site-31, and we know you're attracted to information about yourself. So we limited the scope of where this handy little video could be viewed to 5 terminals in the site. We put measures in place to notify us whenever the file was accessed, and from which terminal, at which point MTF Eta-10 would be dispatched to seal off all available exits and quarantine the room around the terminal, a process that would only take several minutes. Just enough time for a vain little creature to watch a video about itself, as it's forever entombed within the telltale terminal that finally gave it away. You wouldn't be brought into a containment chamber, so we simply brought the containment chamber to you. As the network connections for this particular terminal are shut off, we can safely say you won't be causing us problems anymore. You're a very clever anomaly, SCP-3393, just not quite as clever as us.
Hey folks, welcome back to SCP Explained. Sorry if I seem a little out of it today. Truth be told, I've been having real trouble sleeping lately. Perhaps it's because I spend so much time pouring through the files of the SCP Foundation archive. Also, I've been catching up on the West Wing. There's plenty of creatures, entities, objects, and tales that are very effective at making you lose sleep, but none quite as effective as SCP-966. Grab yourself a pot of coffee and prop your eyelids open with some matchsticks or tape, because you need to stay alert if you want to survive this one. Though when you get on the wrong side of SCP-966, I'm sorry to tell you that your chances of survival are extremely low. And after experiencing its primary anomalous effects, the question of how long you'll even want to survive will become disturbingly prescient. Like many of our explorations into the living nightmares that the SCP Foundation deals with on a daily basis, the best way to experience exactly what SCP-966 can do is to take a look at a case study regarding one of its many unfortunate victims. In this case, that victim is a man named Terry Hallberg from New Mexico. In another life, perhaps Terry would have been an ideal candidate for a junior researcher position at the SCP Foundation. He was a scientific-minded truth seeker whose interests lied in the more esoteric fields of study, namely ghosts and aliens. Proving the existence of life in the stars and the supernatural in general was something he considered to be his life's work. This is why he moved to New Mexico, home of Roswell, and widely considered to be the UFO capital of the United States in the first place. There, he'd perform experiments on a wide range of bizarre phenomenon, from exploring haunted houses to obsessively watching the sky for any anomalous activity. He'd become a bigwig in his niche online paranormal investigation community, and his posts on the somewhat infamous Parawatch forum always garnered plenty of attention. But Terry wanted more. He wasn't in it for the fame, or the money, or the legions of insatiable paranormal investigator groupies. He was a true believer. He wanted a close, first-hand experience with the supernatural, and that was exactly what he was about to get, in addition to a very harsh lesson about being careful what you wish for. It began when he got called out to Albuquerque for a strange case of cattle mutilation. For those who don't frequent the Parawatch forums quite as often as Terry, cattle mutilation is the most common nickname for the phenomenon of large livestock, usually cows, being found dead with unusual mutilation patterns on their corpses. While the particulars of what exactly this means varies from believer to believer, with theories ranging from aliens to black helicopters, it is widely accepted across all branches of paranormal enthusiasts that when cattle are being mutilated, something very strange is afoot. Terry arrived at the ranch, and with the application of a little cash to grease the appropriate palms, he was able to conduct a recorded interview with the rancher. He was a weathered man in his early 60s, with a somewhat frantic demeanor and profoundly tired eyes. When Terry asked him if he'd experienced any unusual phenomenon in the days leading up to the cattle mutilation incident, he was surprisingly forthcoming about the hellish conditions he'd been experiencing lately. The strange experiences had been going on for several days now. It all started when the rancher noticed that a number of his cows weren't sleeping. This isn't the easiest thing to spot in a cow, because cattle engage in what is known as polyphasic sleep, where instead of sleeping for one prolonged period like humans typically do, they sleep in small intervals throughout a 24-hour period. Cows can even sleep standing up for periods of light rest, but during REM sleep, which all mammals need for healthy functioning, they lay down just like us. The problem was, in the last several days, many of the rancher's cows hadn't slept at all. It was after this that the rancher seemingly began to have bizarre paranormal experiences himself. It began with a general sense of unease and dread, which was soon followed by a sense of severe insomnia that had left him completely unable to sleep for the past 2 days. During this period, things had gotten worse. He'd experienced strange noises around his home, footsteps, what sounded like hushed voices, and occasionally even what could only be identified as a low, croaking growl. But it wasn't just noises. There was also physical evidence of some kind of intrusion. Items had been knocked over or moved. At one point, a glass of water, which had been centralized on a stable surface, had somehow fallen off the edge and shattered. The old rancher, with a trembling voice, even stated that he'd seen things moving in the corners of his eyes. Figures, shapes, little green men. And then, the cattle mutilation spree began. It may have sounded morbid, but Terry had to use everything in his power to stop himself from smiling ear to ear. While this was a terrifying experience for the rancher, for Terry, this was an absolutely textbook case of paranormal experience. And here he was, the very first person to document it all. It could be the next Skinwalker Ranch or Rendlesham Forest incident, and his name would forever be attached to it. He asked the rancher if he could see the cow's body, and the rancher obliged. Whatever had caused this, alien, ghost, or otherwise, had really done a number on this cow. Good portions of its abdomen had been torn away, with evidence of what appeared to be biting and clawing. This poor beast had been eaten alive. While exploring the wounds with a magnifying glass, a scalpel, and a large pair of tweezers, Terry discovered something incredible. Something frankly unprecedented for a cattle mutilation case. A piece of evidence left behind directly by whatever had perpetrated this act of gruesome violence. A long, thin, and exceedingly sharp claw, around 12 centimeters in length and broken at one end. New Mexico's large predators included mountain lions, black bears, bobcats, and coyotes, and this claw was nothing like any of those. In fact, it was nothing like Terry had ever seen before. Was this his big moment? Had he discovered evidence of an entirely new supernatural creature or a specimen of extraterrestrial life? He was practically vibrating with excitement about this new discovery. After thanking and paying the rancher again, Terry took some photos, gathered some more samples, and left. He had everything he needed to conduct a groundbreaking investigation into the supernatural. Just wait until the folks on Parawatch heard about this. In all his excitement, as he drove back home from the ranch, he never once stopped to consider what he might be bringing back with him. But really, in the end, it didn't even matter. From the moment he stepped onto that ranch, Terry Hallberg was already doomed. He just didn't know it yet. He arrived home and began to record all of his information onto one master document. He also began obsessively assembling outside research, hoping to find similar cases that he could add to this emerging pattern. It was a mix of phenomenon from both hauntings and alien encounters. Could this possibly be some form of alien ghost? The dream find of every paranormal investigator. Terry had to still his racing heart as the possibilities bombarded his mind. He could have been working with the paranormal find of the century here. In fact, he was so excited by all of this, he didn't even realize that he worked through the entire night. He didn't sleep a wink. After all, how could you, when such important research needed to be done? The burst of nocturnal energy felt like a godsend. The next night, not so much. In the meantime, Terry had compiled his information together enough to present it to his esteemed paranormal colleagues on the Parawatch forums. They were startled and amazed by what they were seeing and hearing, especially the taped interview with the rancher and the mysterious claw. One of Terry's closest associates, who went by the username John Station, pulled up a similar bizarre case of a Los Angeles hiker who died in the hills. In the days before his death, his family and friends reported him complaining about insomnia and experiencing an increasing state of paranoia and distress. He started taking long walks across remote trails in hopes of tiring himself out enough to finally get some sleep, but that time never came. When his corpse was found, it was mauled and half-eaten. Everyone assumed that a mountain lion had killed him, and other scavengers had fed on him before his body was found. But now, Terry wasn't so sure. The more they looked into it, the more they found strange and unpleasant deaths connected to people suffering from what seemed like severe insomnia. Despite its debilitating effects, the only type of insomnia that directly causes death is the exceedingly rare genetic condition fatal familial insomnia, which couldn't account for the sheer number of deaths the Parawatch team were finding. In their minds, there was only one reasonable conclusion. The deaths weren't the result of the insomnia itself, but whatever was causing it. It was only then that Terry noticed his own inability to sleep, and his previous excitement was gradually replaced with panic. At first, he tried to keep it all in proportion, knowing that it's easy to invent things to fear when you're in uncharted territory. But as the days passed and the sleep never came, his worry became unassailable. Terry knew that he hadn't just discovered a new paranormal phenomenon, he was becoming one of its victims. He became increasingly paranoid over the next few days, taking constant EVP readings from around his apartment in hopes of detecting whatever was around him. There were strange noises, frightening noises. He just knew it. But little did poor Terry know, there was a very good reason he couldn't detect his tormentors. While he had been in his apartment for days now, he had no hope of ever seeing them. The human eye's spectrum of visible light is around 380 to 750 nanometers, but the monsters who deprived him of his ability to sleep existed somewhere around 900. They were entirely undetectable to the human eye, and they were waiting for their latest meal. As the insomnia grew worse, Terry received some frightening news. That rancher who he'd spoken to a few days before was found dead on his property, with severe injuries comparable to that of a wild animal attack. Just like his cattle, and just like all the other strange cases the Parawatch Forum had found, first the insomnia, then the frightening paranormal experiences, and then Terry felt something warm and wet trickling down the back of his neck. He probably would have realized it was his own blood, if a 20-centimeter claw, just like the one he had pulled out of the dead cow, hadn't just pierced his brainstem. Terry Hallberg had finally gotten what he wanted, a first-hand experience with the supernatural, and all he had to do was die. But in his defense, being saved from SCP-966, a whole species of monsters known as the Sleep Killers, is almost worse than being killed by them. When they release their deadly energy pulse, their primary anomalous effect, which induces sleeplessness on anyone or anything in their immediate 20-meter radius, the effects are permanent. They essentially induce fatal insomnia, and your only options are to die by their claws or live long enough to see your own body and mind give out from the horrible effects of true sleep deprivation. They travel in pairs, and because of their invisibility, you never know when they're lurking around you, waiting to rob you of your sleep and then your life. The Foundation currently has 4 specimens in containment, but believe us, there are a lot more out there, and they're hungry. Sleep tight, if you can.
Thousands lay dead across the globe, face twisted into a twitching rictus grin. Their corpses are found by their families, their friends, and law enforcement, but nobody has a clue what could possibly have killed them all. A serial killer, a mysterious new disease, or possibly even a supernatural monster. In all of this, who could possibly expect a rogue meme? Before we uncover the secrets of SCP-3078, the Foundation would like to clarify its position on the classification of Cognitohazards. You may have seen the title of this video and worried that we might be telling you all about an anomaly involving literal excrement. But don't worry, this is merely the result of a precaution we've taken to ensure that there is no breach of a standard procedure involving cognitohazardous materials. To quote the father of modern toxicology, Paracelsus, "Poison is in everything, and nothing is without poison. The dosage makes it either a poison or a remedy." The Foundation has categorized many types of cognitohazards, but we are not the only organization with rules and regulations regarding such things. To put it another way, there are certain words and phrases that the YouTube platform deems cognitohazardous and must, therefore, be avoided, lest the Foundation risk its own funding in the name of accuracy. We hope that you understand as we proceed. With that out of the way, let us move on to the menacing memetic macro itself. SCP-3078, the Cognitohazardous Poop Post. It's 3 a.m., and you're scrolling through social media, checking on the latest gossip and discourse while making the rounds to all of the usual places where you get your funnies. In your late-night search, you stumble upon a meme that hits your brain in exactly the wrong way. The joke isn't even that funny, but somehow you begin to laugh uncontrollably. What was it that caused you to lose your grip? Was it the tiredness you were feeling? The doldrums of seeing so many unwholesome opinions before encountering the image? Or maybe something about the meme was so poorly constructed that it crossed the line twice and looped back around to being hilarious? You're not sure, and in fact, as you continue to crack up, you become even less sure of what it is that you are laughing at. You try to stop yourself, but the involuntary response continues. Your sides begin to hurt and you double over as tears begin to stream down your cheeks. You cover your face and try to bite against the insides of your mouth, but there is no stopping the giggle train. The giggle train keeps on rolling through, and your chattering teeth nearly bite too hard. You stop because of the pain and continue to laugh loudly. Under ordinary circumstances, you might worry about waking someone up at this late hour. But as you recall, you are completely alone in the house tonight. There is nobody who would be disturbed by your seemingly endless burst of laughter, but that only makes what comes next all the more horrifying. By now, your vision is hazy from all the tears of laughter. You can't even see the offending image that broke your composure. And now the situation is starting to feel inexplicable. That's when you realize you can no longer inhale. The uncontrollable laughing has removed your ability to breathe. If it continues like this, you will meet an untimely fate through suffocation. You are totally alone and unable to call for help as all the spasms of laughter cause you to fall out of your chair. You writhe on the ground, crying and laughing and not even capable of gasping for breath. Your life is fading away, all because of a meme that made you laugh yourself to death. Fortunately, this is not actually you, but it could have been if you had been so lucky as to come across an instance of SCP-3078. Unlike most of the unfunny and low-effort memes that never make it to truly iconic status, this particular strain of image can have devastating effects on those who witness it, and that's no laughing matter. This is because despite its apparent poor quality as a post, the humor response it generates is anomalous in nature, and in every recorded case of exposure, quite deadly. To date, SCP-3078 has claimed the lives of 3,576 civilians and 2 members of Foundation personnel. Discovered in the untamed Wild West of the Internet, SCP-3078 is a self-replicating image that can appear without warning on message boards and social media platforms capable of hosting media. In many ways, It is like any other meme that is proliferated through the World Wide Web, with the slight distinction that it doesn't originate from a human source. For every single instance of SCP-3078, an anonymous profile is created simultaneously with the post on the corresponding platform. While any of these profiles cannot be traced back to any existing IP address, there is a predictable quality as to when new ones will spawn, though not where. Every hour that an instance of SCP-3078 exists on the internet, a duplicate of the meme will emerge on another website posted under a new profile. The profiles associated with SCP-3078 share a similar pattern in that the given username will invariably be a random arrangement of the numbers 69 and 420. If these references fly over your head, you are obviously new to the internet. The most that you need to know is that these numbers are automatically funny, and the more that they are used as punchlines, the funnier they become. In much the same way as the poop posts they are connected to, 69 and 420 are memes designed to induce outrageous laughter in those who witness them. When tags and hashtags are applied to SCP-3078 instances, the number 420 is often included, as well as the phrases "don't do weed" and "meme." These are more coded phrases from the internet, meant to evoke universal comedy. The phrase "don't do weed" in particular hints at a connection to a group of interest whom we will soon discuss. Back to the duplication and generation of the images, there have been theories that SCP-3078 is connected in some way to the activities of a group of interest known as Gamers Against Weed. The radical faction of video gaming enthusiasts is known for proliferating the dankest of anomalies throughout the world, and several of these have been contained by the SCP Foundation. You are probably familiar with SCP-3108, the Nerfing Gun, which reduces any object or living organism to a worse state. That powerful weapon is a Gamers Against Weed original, and it is hardly the only SCP that these rising upstarts have seemingly brought into existence. Most of the other SCPs created by Gamers Against Weed interact with media and images. This includes SCP-2293, which modified pre-existing stories to include a new line of dialogue at pivotal moments. The line of dialogue in question will always be, "Did you know that world-renowned author Stephen King was once hit by a car? Just something to consider." While initially meant as a harmless joke between members of the group of interest, the mimetic phrase quickly spiraled out of the gamer's control and began to spread to every corner of the media landscape. Incidents such as these prove that Gamers Against Weed has a track record of creating anomalies that may appear harmless but cause untold destruction in their wake. They may not be an outwardly malicious group of interest, but the problems they cause have serious consequences. If the Cognitohazardous poop posts of SCP-3078 do originate from within the organization, it is believed that the image was created by a member whose online handle is Harmpit. Regardless, the post and its duplicates have long since taken on a life of their own. This duplication process that occurs hourly while an instance of SCP-3078 exists is what is known as an SCP-3078 Connert event. In order to prevent the spread of SCP-3078 images, every instance of the post must be deleted to prevent a Connert event from occurring. For this purpose, a team of Foundation hackers and highly trained meme experts have been assigned to patrol the web for any instances of SCP-3078 and remove them immediately. While this unnamed unit is crucial to saving lives and keeping your browsers safe from cognitohazardous material, it would not be accurate to refer to them as a mobile task force, since they are entirely sedentary in their work. But even without a proper designation, our anomalous hackers have been outfitted with the latest processing systems and can also accomplish all their intended tasks from the comfort of their top-of-the-line gamer chairs. Also, cognitohazard detecting software and augmented reality glasses allow our hackers to safely interact with SCP-3078 without having to use the naked eye. In this way, they are safe by avoiding the meme's laughter-causing anomalous properties. When it comes to busting bad memes, the Foundation hackers are the professionals. Of course, our staff is only able to curtail the number of exposure cases. There seems to be no known way to reverse the erratic laughter that results from seeing an instance of SCP-3078. The only thing worse than a bad viral meme is a bad viral meme that kills like a virus, too. Additionally, because memes tend to be shared in groups and among friends, every instance of SCP-3078 has an indirect knock-on effect that creates a cycle of exposure. While these mass death events caused by SCP-3078 are usually reported as gas leaks or bizarre cult rituals, the truth on the scene is often far more gruesome than one might expect. For example, before SCP-3078 was cleared from the internet, there was a particularly horrifying event that resulted from an instance accidentally being inserted into a slideshow at a company retreat for a major marketing firm. The second the image appeared on screen, an entire room full of executives, specialists, and interns burst into an uproar that continued onward with no indication of stopping. Security footage of the event shows many of the business associates trying to calm themselves before looking around and realizing that everyone in the room was also laughing. The contagious fits of laughter did not stop, and things soon became distressing. The instance of SCP-3078 was not on screen for most of the duration of the crowd's laughter, but when it had appeared, the text on the top of the image read, "When you inhale the devil's Mary Jane smoke," a humorous and trendy reference to weed. The bottom of the macro featured a distorted emoji with deep-fried text that read, "Oh no." Using a Wayback Machine on the confiscated laptop that displayed the image, revealed that over the course of the laughing outburst, the upper text began to change. 20 minutes after the laughter had begun, the image read, "It wasn't supposed to be on the slide, oh my god, this is embarrassing, please stop laughing everyone." 40 minutes later, the text on the SCP-3078 instance changed to, "No, no, no, why can't it stop? This isn't normal, I'm losing my mind, I'm losing it, I'm losing it." 1 hour and 35 minutes later, the entire room had completely lost consciousness, and yet the image changed again to read, "It's over, we can't go on like this, I never should have clicked that link, ha 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 ha, that meme got be dead bro." The next and supposedly permanent change caused the text to become the letters X and D next to each other in a text emoji that repeated 34 times across the instance. There were no survivors, and when the authorities arrived in the conference room, they were alarmed to find that the victims of SCP-3078 were still laughing and smiling, even though they had already expired by suffocation. Somehow, the anomalous properties that compelled laughter from those who viewed the Cognitohazard persisted after all the air had already left their lungs. Raspy noises of sharp breath forced their way out of the respiratory system and larynx of everyone in the room. Because of the continued laughter of the corpses, medical practitioners were instructed to make attempts to save the patients post-exposure. There was nothing that could be done, and in a grisly image that still haunts the dreams of some Foundation staff, the morgue of the hospital that attempted to care for the SCP-3078 victims was stuffed with bodies that were still laughing, even while in their cold lockers. Amnestics were administered to everyone involved in the mass exposure event, and efforts to wipe out all SCP-3078 images were redoubled. In accordance with damages done, agents of the Foundation were dispatched to track down members of Gamers Against Weed for comment and possible assistance, compelled if necessary. It may not surprise you to hear that many of the GAW-aligned hackers who were caught and contained during these proceedings were pressed into service as conscripted hackers for the Foundation's ongoing web presence. Ever since the year 2017, all known instances of SCP-3078 have been successfully neutralized. Long-term containment is not deemed possible due to the potential of another image being posted at any time. But when such a time does arise, our teams will be ready to delete the instance within the hour to prevent an SCP-3078 Cunard event. Of course, in the years since, there was never a direct admission of guilt on the part of Gamers Against Weed, or a promise to cease their activities as a group of interest, but the Foundation has been monitoring the gamers ever since. The frightening thing about SCP-3078 isn't so much its deadly consequences, but the fact that it can spread so quickly if unattended. The internet is a very big and very strange place, where any number of unusual things can happen. Sure, this Cognitohazard was neutralized, but what other memetic nightmares are lurking in isolated forums that most people who use the internet have never so much as laid eyes upon? In the ocean of data that has existed since the Information Age, there are dark trenches where anomalies fester and grow stronger, without the supervision of responsible adults. Like the ancient and omnivalent Cthulhu from the cosmic horror works of author H.P. Lovecraft, There are visions of madness that mere normies are not meant to see. The worst of them remain the objects of worship for select groups of withdrawn hermits, many of whom will live their lives in darkness, never endeavoring to feel the light of the sun or place their soft, uncalloused hands upon blades of grass. SCP-3078 may have been detected on the surface of the internet, but only after it spread to major social media platforms. Its discovery and neutralization sets a benchmark for how to handle similar threats, but it would be naive to assume that the next killer meme will be as determined to make us laugh. It bears mentioning that another Gamers Against Weed SCP, SCP-5273, is the designation given to a kind of text and image post that can create irrational anger in those who observe it. If a similar anomaly were to arise that combined the worst elements of SCP-3078 with SCP-5273, there is a possibility that a Cognitohazard meme could be created that drives the viewer into a murderous rage. While purely theoretical, the Foundation remains prepared for anything. By their very nature, Cognitohazards are weapons against the mind, and because of this, only the truly twisted tend towards creating them or using them consistently. Even an entirely sane creator of a Cognitohazard may find themselves corrupted by what they have done, and come to regret ever attempting to change others' minds in the first place. So remember, with or without anomalous properties, memes are serious business and not to be trifled with. Without a proper understanding of the power of memes, a simple harmless idea can spread on its own and become an unintended source of mass suffering. Know your memes, fear your memes, respect your memes.
The SCP Foundation has faced a number of wide, potentially apocalyptic threats in its mission to uphold normalcy and save humanity. We know the SCP Foundation could be ruthless in this mission. The events of SCP-5000 before Agent Pietro restarted the universe show what happens when the Foundation is pushed to its final decisions regarding normalcy being upheld. In SCP-5000, it seemed that the SCP Foundation decided to cease research further into the anomaly they needed to neutralize. But what would have happened if they didn't? In any case, we know the SCP Foundation is dedicated to normalcy and the containment of the anomalous. But what happens when the SCP Foundation is faced with a dire decision: uphold normalcy or destroy their universe? The multiverse is a concept in science fiction that has gained mass amounts of popularity over recent years, especially recently thanks to a certain wall crawlers movie. Multiverses are parallel universes that are similar or extremely different from the main ones. Scientists have pondered over the existence of a multiverse for hundreds of years, with the most popular being the many worlds interpretation, a theory of quantum mechanics that states there are many worlds that exist in parallel at the same space and time as our own. Some interpretations even state that every decision a person makes causes a branch in reality where the person made the other decision. We're familiar with the SCP Foundation's run-ins with the multiverse, from SCP-2935-0 Death, a cave that allows the Wanderer to enter a parallel dimension that's fully and completely dead, only for the same thing to happen to their own world once they return through the cave, or SCP-1437, a hole that allows the Foundation to send, receive, and read parallel dimensional documentation from other multiversal SCP Foundations. Combine those two concepts with an SCP-001 proposal. The importance of an SCP-001 proposal is not lost on the Foundation. Researchers of the SCP Foundation saved the SCP-001 slot for only the most dangerous, apocalyptic, or widespread anomalies that could affect the Foundation itself, humanity, and normalcy. Arbalic's SCP-001 proposal and the research within its file found the answer to the question we posed above. When the SCP Foundation is faced with a dire decision, do they uphold normalcy or destroy their universe and all the people who live in it? The file begins somewhat different from what we're used to with SCP Foundation files. Instead of an item number or containment procedures, we begin with a yellow notice from the Records and Information Security Administration, or RAISA for short. The notice states that the following file was received in 2026 from Dimension R42. Is Dimension R42 potentially the cause of SCP-001?
Could they be attacking this version of the SCP Foundation? The notice continues with the description of the file that follows it. It states the file below describes an anomaly threatening all members of humankind in all of the multiverse. This file had been emitted to this version of the SCP Foundation for 8 minutes as an extremely dangerous cognitohazard, classified as a Class 5 cognitohazard capable of easily destabilizing and penetrating this universe. However, it was found to not be dangerous, only reading as a danger level 0. While this Foundation was unable to quickly counteract this cognitohazard, it appeared to not pose a threat to the affected universe's humankind. Part of this notice is crossed out, indicating that it is no longer true. There is a high threat of repeated cognitohazardous or other forms of attack from Dimension R42. Instead, this part has been replaced with the following fact. Dimension R42 no longer exists. Did this version's SCP Foundation fall to SCP-001? Their entire universe no longer exists, so perhaps this file that this dimension's SCP Foundation received could be a potential warning. Under this race and notice, the reader is not greeted with the standard Foundation documentation yet again. Instead, it seems that the original senders of this file left a note for the readers of this file. It says, "Greetings. You are reading this dossier in a paradimension of the relict dimension R42. Due to the colossal size of your world's address, for your convenience, your dimension will be hereafter referred to as PD. Paradimensions." It seems as though we're reading this SCP-001 file through the eyes of the SCP Foundation in this so-called paradimension. So, if the original SCP Foundation and their universe, R42, is now destroyed, what does this mean for us? The note continues. The following message has been constructed by the SCP Foundation of the Relic Dimension R42 and is addressed to the SCP Foundation of Paradimension PD. Enclosed, you will find information about SCP-001, which is a threat to the multiverse. Here we go. SCP-001 is definitely the cause of R42's destruction, but how can we be so sure of this? Maybe SCP-001 caused the Foundation to destroy their universe. The note also includes the following statement. As you may have noticed, this message was preceded by a burst signal containing a non-dangerous cognitohazard. The burst signal was constructed in such a way that minimal change to the signal would have caused indiscriminate and overwhelming casualties among the denizens of PD. As you can see, R42 is capable of eliminating the absolute majority of PD denizens, but has not exercised this capability. In the context above, we ask you to consider this action not as an act of aggression, but as a demonstration of the fact that R42 has no pretension for conquest or other forms of aggression towards PD. Take the following information in earnest. Well, at least this version of the SCP Foundation is being somewhat friendly with the paradimension. If R42's SCP Foundation needs to quell this multiversal threat though, why are they leaving it up to an SCP Foundation that may not be so inclined? The SCP-001 file begins with the object class. This anomaly is of the joint class of Paradox Apollyon. We know from SCP-001 When Day Breaks or SCP-3999 that Apollyon-class anomalies are extremely dangerous, posing an immediate and almost unstoppable threat to normalcy, the SCP Foundation, all of humanity, or even the universe itself. The paradox part is interesting. What exactly is paradoxical about an Apollyon-class anomaly? A footnote explains this for us. This anomaly's distinguishing feature is that, in order to eliminate the anomaly that will inevitably eliminate mankind, it is imperative to eliminate mankind or release another K-class event. Oh boy. It seems that the SCP Foundation of R42 was not eliminated by SCP-001. They eliminated themselves to contain SCP-001. Is this paradimension faced with this decision now? The containment procedures of the SCP file continue on this note. The only way to contain SCP-001 and prevent a ZK-class cross-reality failure event is the annihilation of humankind. K-class scenarios are not a concept used lightly by the SCP Foundation. We're familiar with the Omega K-class scenario when we are completely rid of death, or XK class end-of-the-world scenarios, so we know the danger these anomalies hold to humankind, normalcy, and the world. The SCP Foundation will do anything to prevent these scenarios from occurring, apparently even including the elimination of all humankind or entire universes. The description goes more in depth on the SCP-001 anomaly. SCP-001 consists of all living members of the Homo sapiens species living within Dimension R42 and the Paradimension, or PD for short. It seems as though this anomaly was created out of a mistake from Dimension R42 and PD. As the description states, the anomaly first came into existence and developed in the relic Dimension R42, and later activated in PD by accident. How could this have happened? Are these dimensions linked much more closely than we first thought? Let's continue with the description to find more information. Scarily, this portion of the description contains a note that states that unchecked growth of SCP-001 will cause the annihilation of the entire multiverse. The SCP Foundations of Dimension R42 and PD are not met with this decision, as now the entire multiverse is at risk. The R42 SCP Foundation has done immense research on the topic of the multiverse of their universe. After the Big Bang, a finite number of universes were created, only 57 to be exact. However, only one dimension was able to form humanity, Dimension R42, and it's unknown why this happened. But all we know is that with the destruction of R42 and the potential annihilation of PD, humanity will cease to exist in the multiverse. The danger of SCP-001 is that it has the anomalous capability for wide-scale replication of paradimensions. We are reading this article from one of these paradimensions, so this SCP Foundation is technically an anomaly that must contain itself. A paradimension is defined as a parallel reality that has an extremely small deviation from its parent dimension. In this case, PD is a paradimension of R42. It seems that these paradimensions form as a result of human decision-making. So if you've ever been between a type of shirt to buy or were confused on an exam and guessed a question, a paradimension could have formed from this decision, where the paradimension has you take the other choice. Because of this, dimensions housing living instances of SCP-001 uncontrollably grow a colossal number of minimally differing paradimensions every second. No sign of paradimensions have been found in the other 56 parent dimensions. The picture on this file shows how PD has branched from R42, but at this point, it seems that millions, if not billions or trillions of paradimensions now exist. The real problem of paradimensions is that the multiverse has a limit on the number of paradimensions that can exist, and once that is crossed, the ZK-class cross-reality failure event will begin, and the multiverse will be destroyed. The R42 Dimensions SCP Foundation has also discovered that once humankind emerges in the paradimension, they can begin to have paradimensions themselves. The ZK-class cross-reality failure event can be expected to begin between 4 to 2 months from the PD receiving this message. To summarize, SCP-001 is humankind, specifically its decision-making. When a person makes a decision, a paradimension may be created. The multiverse has a limit on the number of paradimensions it can have, and since paradimensions can have paradimensions, they are quickly approaching the ZK-class cross-reality failure event. The SCP Foundation of R42 is approximately 17 years ahead of PD, which allowed them to research and develop containment procedures to contain the anomaly and save the multiverse. R42's SCP Foundation discovered SCP-001 5 years before writing the file we're reading now. Aside from that, they developed 2 operations, Castling and Minimal Gain, to slow paradimension creation and prevent the ZK-class cross-reality failure event. In Stage 1 of Operation Minimal Gain, the Foundation began with neutralizing and decommissioning all of their contained anomalies under the classification of Euclid or Keter, specifically those that were expensive to contain or requiring high levels of personnel and researchers. Stage 2 saw Operation Castling be commenced. The R42 SCP Foundation launched rockets with variant C global amnestic dispersing warheads and took control over all countries in order to hold power over all humankind. In Stage 3, the Foundation began to move their world to a more natural state, destroying all hazardous, radioactive, chemical, and bacteriological objects, removing dams, and stopping oil extractions. During Stage 3, Stage 4 began. The R42 SCP Foundation began eliminating humanity in third world countries by use of viral and biological attacks. Stage 5 was a wider spread attack on humanity, where the SCP Foundation added deactivation-resistant viral agents to water treatment and collection plants, food products, medication, and household items of developed countries. By Stage 6, only 0.1% of humanity remained, and they were targeted with drone strikes or put into concentration camps for elimination. Stage 7. Of the remaining survivors, the Foundation sampled them to find the fittest of those left to preserve humankind. Stage 8 saw 15,000 of these people put into indefinite cryosleep, and the remaining survivors were eliminated. Stage 9 saw the destruction of the remaining SCP Foundation personnel. We move on to a list of proposals that were made before or during Operations Castling and Minimal Gain. Proposals rejected include the use of SCP objects or other technologies to eliminate derivative dimensions, the development of nanobots with the capability to control human decision-making capabilities and eliminate variability, full replacement of humanity with bionic hybrids acting explicitly within standard behavioral models, unification of humanity into a neural network with control given to an AI control unit, and the destruction of Earth and/or all of its inhabitants. While most of these seem like clear solutions that would prevent the elimination of humanity at the SCP Foundation's hand, these proposals were all rejected for one reason. The SCP Foundation did not have enough time. One proposal was accepted, however, the use of SCP-0000. This appears to be the solution the R42 SCP Foundation concocted to fight SCP-001 and potentially save the multiverse. It poses the question, if the R42 SCP Foundation used this same anomaly to contain SCP-001, as proven by the fact they no longer exist, will PD do the same? The file explains that the R42 SCP Foundation opened a dimensional wormhole into PD, as they do not know at the time if paradimensions could cause the creation of more paradimensions. In doing this, the SCP Foundation seemingly infected PD with the ability to create paradimensions. The author of this file goes on to explain that the R42 SCP Foundation had plans to attack PD and use Operations Castling and Minimal Gain in the dimension. However, they could not access the dimension again, and they believe that the Foundation personnel of PD would have made use of Thaumiel-class anomalies to save themselves and their world. A note from R42's Overseer Council is left for PD. If the Apollyon destruction was not enough, the Overseer Council is involved. The importance of the neutralization of this anomaly cannot be forgotten, so the Overseer Council explained to PD. The world has existed before us and must remain after us. Our multiverse is ill, and the name of the illness is humanity. SCP-001. The only way out is SCP-0000. Will cease to become a threat with its help. It is in our power to leave a chance for other sapient species that, perhaps, will not be affected by the same anomaly, or will find a way to get rid of it before it's too late. We, the O5 Council, and other survivors from R42 have chosen our fate. We hope you will do the same. What is this SCP-0000? How did the SCP Foundation of R42 find this solution? The file for SCP-0000 is placed within this SCP-001 file. SCP-0000 is a Paradox Thaumiel-class anomaly without any containment procedures. SCP-0000 is a device that, once activated, will destroy the universe it was activated in. It will also destroy all paradimensions that are not creating other paradimensions. As such, PD would not be destroyed. However, the billions or trillions of other paradimensions the R42 parent dimension created will be destroyed. PD is left with the harrowing decision to continue living or destroy itself to save the rest of the multiverse. In the file, a note from R42's Jones Simpson is written for an SCP Foundation Overseer,
05-1. As part of Operations Castling and Minimal Gain, the remaining Foundation employees were allowed one family member to uphold morale. Joan is not writing for R42's 05-1. Instead, she's writing for PD's 05-1, this dimension's version of her father. She begins with wondering whether she can call this version of 05-1 her father, as her version of her father recently passed away. She remembers the day the Foundation employees were allowed to choose that one family member they would save for the time being. Her father was opposed to allowing two family members, as he claimed it would cause unnecessary stress and schisms among the remaining few hundred Foundation staff. 05-1 chose to have Joan over her mother, and she understood everything by the look in his eyes, and grew angry, but that feeling is long gone now. She began to work with her father and the remaining Foundation personnel that called themselves hostages behind the backs of those higher up the ranks. On days she felt sad, Joan and her father would go up to the surface of the earth in hazmat suits, sitting on the grass and watching over the empty city at the bottom of the mountain. No humanity remained, with the only life she could see being birds. Her father promised her that they'd return there and build a giant monument to humanity at the center of the city. She knew this was a lie. Joan remembers when someone proposed that they should open a portal, the one that opened to PD. This was their fatal mistake, as after that the paradimension began replicating paradimensions. The countdown went down to months again, and the promise he made to his daughter became impossible. 05-1 died and left the position vacant. Joan says to the PD's 05-1 that she doesn't care whether they destroy their world or not, or whether the universe will continue to exist, or if there will be new life in it. Her world was crushed long ago. The note also reads the following: "It's good that this message is encrypted with your key that was passed on to me, or these lines would have been deleted. Everyone wants to save the world, but who needs it like this? Empty and cold, without those to appreciate its beauty, without humanity. Do whatever you think is right. I truly feel better now. Love you. Faithfully yours, Joan Simpson." We're not too sure if PD went through with destroying their universe to save the multiverse, but it seems that whatever decision was made would cause the destruction of that universe, whether that be through the use of SCP-0000 or the ZK-class cross-reality failure event. Humanity will cease. But maybe if they make the decision to use SCP-0000, sapient life can begin to exist again, and hopefully, no paradimensions will be made from their decisions. Decisions are an extremely innate part of humanity. You decided to get out of bed this morning. You decided to open up your computer or phone, and you decided to watch this video. Who knows the amount of paradimensions we may have created today? But in our world, we're not at risk. But in the SCP Foundation's universe, anything can be anomalous, even humanity.
The SCP Foundation is an organization that polices the abnormal in all its forms. Whether it's a multi-dimensional chaos god, a big scaly monster, or a very effective coffee machine, the Foundation takes a pointed interest in pretty much anything outside the norm. So you're probably wondering, what would they want with Mr. Smith, a man who was about as normal and average as could be? Mr. Smith was a 47-year-old African-American construction worker with a wife and daughter. He lived a modest but contented life. He had a close circle of friends, a happy family, and was well liked among his co-workers. But Mr. Smith had no idea about the anomalous nightmare barreling down the tracks towards him. Mr. Smith wasn't just about to have his life destroyed by an anomaly. He was about to become one. It seemed like a normal day at work on the construction site when he received a phone call. It was the police, informing him that his wife and young daughter had been involved in a terrible car accident. While this is anyone's worst nightmare, it was only the start of the horrifying things that were about to happen to poor Mr. Smith. That night, when Mr. Smith went to sleep, he fell victim to a strange phenomenon. He started to disappear. While it would be easy to write off as the result of mental illness, like a kind of stress-induced mental breakdown, Mr. Smith wasn't the only one who noticed. Or rather, didn't notice. His coworkers would slowly begin to forget details about him, even obvious things that you could glean from simply looking at a person, like clothes, height, or skin color. It seemed that, little by little, ever since his family died, Mr. Smith was becoming an unperson. This led to increasing levels of fear, paranoia, and distress, as people whom he'd thought of as his closest friends could barely recognize him anymore. Thankfully, Mr. Smith wasn't just going to slip into non-existence without a fight. He realized early on that his new condition seemed to abide by certain rules. The effects got worse in the night when he was alone, but seemed to lessen somewhat during the day when he was interacting with people. It seemed that he disappeared just that little bit more whenever he wasn't being interacted with. And perhaps he hadn't developed this condition upon the death of his wife and child. Maybe he'd had it for a while, but it was the constant presence of his family that kept the effects from worsening. But now that he'd properly identified the problem, Mr. Smith could begin devising some solutions. If nobody else was there to interact with him at night, he'd keep his position in reality stable by interacting with himself. Mr. Smith would repeat his own name to himself regularly, reaffirming his existence to himself. He'd often check his own pulse to feel the rhythm of his heartbeat. He'd write detailed descriptions of himself, either on his own body or a surrounding surface. And in one particular stroke of genius, he devised a method of recording his own voice talking to himself and playing it back while he was asleep to stave off reality decay. During the day, while at work or just existing socially in the world, he'd do everything he could to constantly interact with people. That way, they could keep reaffirming his presence and therefore continuing his existence. The symptoms of Mr. Smith's condition are somewhat similar to a rare mental illness known as the Cotard delusion, in which a patient believes they are dead, dying, or don't even exist. Except in Mr. Smith's unfortunate case, the delusion was becoming a reality. And this was a reality that Mr. Smith could only hold off for so long. Little by little, the coping mechanisms he'd built to manage his new life began to collapse. People in his inner circle truly began to forget him. His company no longer recognized him as an employee. To the people who barely knew him, he was little more than a ghost, a kind of palpable absence. This was the point when the SCP Foundation finally got involved. They swooped in and apprehended Mr. Smith, redesignating him as SCP-1467. It was one of the rare occasions that the Foundation didn't need to apply any amnestic treatment to bystanders, because, due to the nature of Mr. Smith's anomalous activity, almost everyone who knew him was already in the process of forgetting him. When the Foundation interviewed a man that Mr. Smith referred to as a close friend, he couldn't even recall Mr. Smith's basic physical traits with any reliability. Because of Mr. Smith's condition, the Foundation had real difficulty verifying elements of his backstory. Mr. Smith told the Foundation researchers everything about himself, about his family, and his life before. But field agents were stumped whenever they tried to follow up on the information. First, there were issues with the existence and fate of his supposed wife and child. No records were ever found of either of these people existing, and there was no existing documentation to prove that Mr. Smith was ever married. The Foundation also looked into the deaths of Mrs. Smith and her child. There were no records of a car crash in the area that Mr. Smith directed them to. But that's not all. There were also no death records, nor any graves ever found. The construction company that Mr. Smith claimed to work for had no records of his employment. They couldn't find any of Mr. Smith's supposed extended family either. The only proof that he had ever existed was his physical body, locked in a Foundation humanoid containment cell, and Mr. Smith's own words. If you think this sounds like a living nightmare, then Mr. Smith would wholeheartedly agree with you. The effects of his anomalous nature traumatized Mr. Smith. He was diagnosed by Foundation therapists as suffering from bipolar depression, as well as chronic sleep deprivation. Though if you disappeared a little more every time you slept, you'd probably lose a lot of sleep too. The unpredictable nature of Mr. Smith's anomalous traits could have equally unpredictable effects on the nature of his containment, so he was classified as Euclid. Mr. Smith is one of the few anomalies that is referred to by his real name, at least to his face. When referred to as SCP-1467, Mr. Smith enters a state of rage and panic, and this mistake has caused several injuries for Foundation personnel during attempts to restrain him after using his SCP number around him. Mr. Smith is contained in a foam-padded cell to prevent self-destructive behavior, along with 3 audio recording devices, though these were installed at his own request, in order to continue his habit of recording his own voice to play back to himself while asleep. This served the dual purpose of not only mitigating his fading from reality, but also keeping him calm and docile during containment, and these devices are kept in good working order in order to avoid creating hostility between Mr. Smith and Foundation staff. While it may seem that the anomalous effects of Mr. Smith purely served to create a personal hell for him and him alone, the Foundation wasn't so sure. The fact no records could be found of his wife, daughter, or extended family was concerning. It raised one frightening question. Are the effects of Mr. Smith's condition contagious? If so, he could be putting a lot of people in grave danger. Foundation scientists headed by senior researcher Dr. Thorne devised a series of experiments to better understand Mr. Smith's mysterious condition. There were 22 experiments in total, but things began to get interesting at around experiment 16. For this experiment, Mr. Smith was forcibly restrained and brought into a research chamber with research assistants Rainier and Dieter. They were told to simply observe Mr. Smith without interacting with him, and record what happened in the process while Dr. Thorne supervised. At 10 minutes and 12 seconds, the researchers were unable to recognize the subject as Mr. Smith. At 14 minutes and 32 seconds, they were unable to recognize the clothes of Mr. Smith. Less than 10 minutes later, they were unable to identify his race. 5 minutes after that, they couldn't identify what Mr. Smith was currently doing. 10 minutes later, they couldn't even identify how Mr. Smith was sitting. At almost 40 minutes, the research assistants weren't able to identify anything of Mr. Smith, save for the fact that there was some kind of humanoid creature in the room. At this point, research assistant Dieter started a recording, instructing Mr. Smith to describe himself on record. As this happened, Smith returned to a describable state, curled up in a fetal position on the floor. There was no sign of the restraints or the chair in which Smith had been placed. Subsequent tests showed similar results, with minor variations in timing. Just by being in physical contact with Mr. Smith, the chair and the restraints had literally faded out of existence. Evidence was really pointing towards Mr. Smith's anomalous effects being potentially detrimental to the people and objects around him. But the experiments continued. They had to know more before there was nothing left to know. The next series of experiments were performed with D-classes and led Dr. Thorne and his team of researchers to a number of frightening conclusions. 2 D-classes locked in with Mr. Smith as he slipped out of existence began experiencing extreme states of terror and distress. Even when they could no longer see him, they could still feel the presence of an entity in the room. When the 2 D-classes tried to escape, one of them was almost mistaken for Mr. Smith himself. He too was now starting to slip out of existence. Both D-classes were summarily terminated, and Dr. Thorne began to wonder whether Mr. Smith's condition was contagious, or if he was instead somehow able to lash out at others in his vicinity in a more localized fashion. Only 2 other experiments were ever performed on Mr. Smith before further experimentation into his case was permanently suspended. In the first, a non-violent D-class was placed in Mr. Smith's cell and ordered to ignore him. Mr. Smith didn't take this well. He began attacking the D-class, who fought back, breaking Mr. Smith's nose. Ironically, this physical attack was actually beneficial to Mr. Smith, as the violence helped ground him in reality and secured his existence just that little bit more. In the final experiment, Mr. Smith was given a cellmate, a female D-class who was allowed to acknowledge him. The 2 appeared to become close, and their time helped stave off Mr. Smith's fading just a little bit longer. It's unknown if she contracted his fading condition or somehow was able to escape, but one day while Mr. Smith slept, she simply disappeared. Mr. Smith fell into a state of almost catatonic silence. Soon after, he began to speak again, only to repeat, "I don't want to go," again and again and again. Experiments concluded for good not long after. Because of his delicate mental state, Mr. Smith is allowed a visit from a therapist every week, and before any future experiments are performed on Mr. Smith, researchers are required to seek permission from his active therapist. Because of his effects on the minds of people aware of him, Foundation protocol is to terminate Mr. Smith immediately if he ever breaches containment. The site director has also appended a memo to Smith's file, instructing personnel to refer to Mr. Smith as SCP-1467 whenever he's out of earshot. Doing otherwise will incur severe punishments. Records on Mr. Smith are backed up in 6 separate copies and stored in different locations, in hopes that this will prevent the information from decaying, like Mr. Smith's existence. Mr. Smith's story is one of pain, tragedy, and existential horror. There's no shortage of SCPs that can cause XK-class end-of-the-world scenarios, but sometimes, the terror of these anomalies pales in comparison to SCPs that can bring one person's world crashing down around them. According to all the SCP Foundation's studies, it's likely that Mr. Smith will disappear sometime soon, regardless of their intervention. On a cold October night in 2003, Shirley Yates of Seattle, Washington was just about to get ready for bed when she heard a knock at the door. She approached the door and asked the person on the other side to identify themselves. The voice outside responded immediately. It was a salesman who just wanted a few moments of Mrs. Yates' time. This was odd for 2 reasons. First, it was almost 10 o'clock at night, much later than is usual for door-to-door salesmen. And second, the knock hadn't come from Mrs. Yates's front door. It was coming from the door to her bathroom. Has your home ever been visited by a door-to-door salesman? If you were born in the last 40 years, then your answer to that question is probably no. In the age of online shopping, the idea of a salesperson going from house to house hawking vacuum cleaners or encyclopedia sets feels like a relic from the past. It's highly unlikely you'd ever see one walking the streets nowadays, and equally unlikely that one would knock on your front door. However, if you live in Washington state, you might need to be wary of a certain salesman who is still doing the rounds. SCP-1879, also known as the Indoor Salesman and the Doorman, is a phenomenon that manifests randomly in homes throughout Washington. Subjects will hear persistent knocking from the interior doors of their homes, and the affected door becomes classified as SCP-1879-1. The knocking doesn't stop until the door is opened, at which point the subject will be greeted by SCP-1879-2, a Caucasian man of indeterminate age standing around 170 centimeters tall. The man will claim to be a salesman and immediately try to pitch a bizarre product to the subject whose home he's just invaded. The SCP Foundation was first alerted to the existence of the indoor salesman when they had intercepted a 911 call coming from the home of Mrs. Shirley Yates. She had opened the door to her bathroom in an attempt to get the salesman to stop knocking, and once he was in her home, he refused to leave. According to Yates, he kept disappearing in and out of random doors in her house. Foundation Field Agent Rogers was equipped with a recording device and sent in to investigate the case with several other agents. When he arrived at the home, he found Mrs. Yates inconsolable. SCP-1879-2 was still rapidly talking at her, and strangely enough, the product he was holding and trying to sell to her was a Border Collie puppy. As soon as Agent Rogers entered the room, the man shifted his attention away from Mrs. Yates and towards him. He then started trying to sell the puppy to Agent Rogers. Agent Rogers did not want to purchase this puppy, but he found that the man spoke so quickly and urgently, he couldn't get a word in edgewise. The man was begging Rogers to take the puppy, practically shoving it in his face, saying that he didn't need any money, and that the only payment he needed would be some of your time. Rogers grew so annoyed at being talked over and interrupted that he ordered the other field agents to apprehend the indoor salesman. They did so, but as soon as the agents walked him out of the front door of the house, he disappeared without a trace. The agents remained in the area to monitor the situation. SCP-1879-2 manifested again in Mrs. Yates's home 6 hours later, still trying to trade the puppy for no money, just a little of her time, 12 years to be precise. After hours and hours of being worn down by this supernaturally pushy salesman, Yates relented and agreed to take the puppy, and immediately disappeared. The indoor salesman then disappeared himself through the closet door before he could be apprehended again. At a loss for what to do, the agents administered Class A amnestics to Mrs. Yates's family and left. The reason for her disappearance wasn't fully known until 12 years later in 2015, when she reappeared in the same spot she disappeared from, having no concept of how much time had passed. The puppy really had just cost her 12 years of her life. Stories like that of Shirley Yates have popped up all over the state in the years since, from Everett to Walla Walla and everywhere in between. Due to the random nature of SCP-1879 events and the way the indoor salesman can disappear instantly in and out of any door in a building, the SCP Foundation has been unable to capture him. The best they've been able to do is monitor 911 calls from across the state, listening for keywords that might indicate another SCP-1879 infestation. When such an event is reported, the Foundation deploys Mobile Task Force Row 4, aka Shoes Salesman. This task force's entire purpose is to minimize the amount of harm the indoor salesman is able to cause by intercepting him before he can make a sale. This is a very important task, as evidenced by the story of Mrs. Yates, since while the products this salesman sells might be innocent, he doesn't accept payment in any normal currency. The price he asks for his products are always bizarre and often deadly. If all someone loses is 12 years of their life, they could be considered to be getting off easy. In one instance, the product being sold was a single red rose in exchange for the subject's heart. Once the deal was sealed, the subject dropped dead on the spot, with an autopsy revealing that his heart and circulatory system vanished from inside his body. In another, the indoor salesman offered 220 bananas and told the subject to simply give him some sugar. The subject agreed, and all candied goods in the home disappeared. In a third, the indoor salesman was trying to sell a thermonuclear warhead, the price of which was the subject's soul. The subject accepted, and at first nothing seemed to have happened. The Foundation confiscated the warhead and placed it into non-anomalous containment. Later that day, the subject went to listen to some music, only to find that 2 of her vinyl records had gone missing: Lady Soul and Almighty Fire by world-famous soul singer Aretha Franklin. So, even though he's incredibly invasive, annoying, and his transactions can be deadly, the indoor salesman still maintains a sense of humor. The fact that the Foundation can't capture the indoor salesman means that a lot of questions about him remain unanswered. The biggest by far is why he does what he does. In most SCP-1879 events, the indoor salesman seems frantic and desperate to make a sale. Often he will refer to having quotas and deadlines to meet, which implies some other unseen entity that he has to answer to. These questions remain unanswered because all attempts to interrogate the indoor salesman have been unsuccessful. When he manifests in a location, it's impossible to get him to stray from a sales pitch, and he disappears as soon as he successfully sells his wares. However, there was one instance where, after an SCP-1879 event took place, Foundation agents were there to witness a rare interaction between the indoor salesman and his mysterious employers. Agent Rogers and the rest of the shoes salesmen were called out to a home in Spokane, where rapid knocking had begun to emanate from the bedroom door. Equipped with recording devices, Rogers was able to record the voice of the indoor salesman coming from inside the bedroom. In the recording, the salesman grumbled to himself about not being able to meet his quota by tomorrow, saying that if he didn't, he'd be stuck in this world for the next century. He started knocking again, yelling through the door that he knew they were home. He kept knocking until he was interrupted by the sound of a phone ringing. The indoor salesman was heard picking it up, and Rogers managed to record the conversation. The person calling was, apparently, the indoor salesman's boss, who was calling to complain about his performance. Only one side of the conversation was heard, but evidently the indoor salesman's boss wasn't too happy about receiving 2 Aretha Franklin albums as payment instead of an actual human soul. The indoor salesman apologized for the joke, then told his boss, "It won't happen again, please don't hurt it. I'll meet the quota this time, I swear." He hung up, grumbling to himself again, "I better get to move up to at least accounting this time. I've paid my dues and then some." Rogers finally opened the door to the apparent disappointment of the indoor salesman, who was hoping to speak with the home's owner and was quite annoyed at having another one of his sales interrupted by MTF Row 4. Rogers tried to ask the indoor salesman who he'd just been speaking to on the phone, but as usual, the salesman started talking over him.
Now see here, let's think logically,
he said.
You know I'm not going to tell you anything. I know you're not likely to buy what I'm selling. So let's just move on to greener pastures. I'm coming up close to a deadline, and I'm sure you're swamped with making sure good people don't lose their jobs, so I'll just be on my way and let you do that. Ciao.
The indoor salesman tried to close the door, but Agent Rogers blocked it with his arm. He was tired of this SCP giving him the runaround, and he was going to keep the indoor salesman here if it was the last thing he did. He demanded the entity stay and be interviewed, and other members of the task force apprehended the salesman, making sure he couldn't leave the room. The indoor salesman, now held in place by several armed men, seemed to finally relent. He told Rogers,
I'm busy, so I'll tell you what. I'm going to give you something, no money out of your pocket, and we'll call it even. Sound good?
Rogers, just wanting to get this whole thing over with, agreed to those terms. 3 seconds later, every agent on the scene was dead, and the indoor salesman was able to straighten his tie, pick up his briefcase, and walk through the door to the bathroom. When the bodies of Agent Rogers and the rest of the MTF Row 4 were examined by Foundation scientists, the cause of death was found to be, in every case, thousands of coins suddenly appearing in not only their pockets, but also inside their stomachs, lungs, and even under their skin. Later that day, the indoor salesman was reported at a home in the same neighborhood. He was seen trying to sell the house's owner, 80-year-old retiree Alan Johnson, a Glock 18 pistol in exchange for his attention. As he had done so many times before, the indoor salesman disappeared through another door before the Foundation was able to reach the scene. And when the SCP arrived, they found Mr. Johnson still alive, but now missing his prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that controls attention. It's likely that, because of the nature of the entity, SCP-1879 might be entirely impossible to contain. The Foundation might never find out anything more than what they already know about the indoor salesman, the way he's able to manifest behind closed doors, or the reason he has to keep filling quotas for an unseen boss who apparently doesn't have a very good sense of humor. So, if you're ever in Washington State, be careful who you open your doors to, especially if the knocking you hear is coming from inside your house.
But now, if we could have just a few moments of your time, we've got something real special for you. It's SCP-001, which is the real 001. This is a 30-for-1 deal that you can't pass up, so go watch now.